Do you believe in second chances for love, even with so many difficulties? The soft rustle of autumn leaves blended with the distant sound of cars as Olivia Hayes walked through Central Park, taking a break between appointments. This was her ritual on days when she needed to clear her mind and recharge. A child psychologist specializing in trauma, Olivia spent hours listening to difficult stories, guiding children and families through emotional barriers. But that morning, she had no idea that a chance encounter would change the course of her life. As she approached a small stone bridge, Olivia heard a muffled sob. Looking to her side, she saw a small boy, around 6 years old, sitting on the ground with his knees drawn to his chest, his face hidden in his arms. His crying was quiet, yet each sob seemed to carry an enormous weight of pain. Olivia knelt slowly beside the boy, careful not to startle him. Her elegant clothes contrasted with his fragile and sad expression, and his meticulously kept appearance suggested he shouldn't be alone there. "Hi, I'm Olivia. Are you lost?" she asked gently, keeping a respectful distance. The boy didn't respond. Instead, he curled up even more, as if trying to hide from the world. Olivia sensed he was scared and likely bearing a kind of pain no child his age should endure. Her attempts to converse were futile. He wouldn't say a word, just kept his gaze fixed on the ground, avoiding any contact. "That's okay. I'll stay here with you until we find your guardian, all right?" She kept her voice calm and soft, trying to convey trust. She sat beside him, allowing the silence to settle between them. Gradually, Olivia noticed he started to relax a bit, though still saying nothing. She was about to try again when she heard quick footsteps approaching. A tall man, impeccably dressed in a black suit with a serious expression, stopped in front of her, his face a mix of worry and relief. He looked at the boy and immediately knelt beside him. "Henry, why did you run off?" "I've been looking for you," the man said, his voice low but clearly troubled. The boy, whom Olivia now knew was named Henry, timidly looked up at the man, shrinking back without responding. Olivia observed their interaction, trying to understand their relationship. The man turned to her with an intense gaze, a blend of concern and gratitude. "Thank you for staying with him. I'm Ethan Carter, his father," he said, extending his hand quickly but politely. Olivia accepted his handshake, feeling the firmness in his grip. Despite his rigid appearance and calculating gaze, she noticed a hidden vulnerability, an unspoken exhaustion and desperation. Of course it was no problem. "He seems quite shaken," Olivia said, choosing her words carefully. She didn't want to make judgments, but she couldn't ignore the sense that there was something profound in Henry's eyes. Ethan nodded, looking back at his son, who remained silent with his head down. He seemed to hesitate before turning back to Olivia. "Henry has been through some difficult things," he admitted, his voice calm but carrying an emotional weight Olivia didn't miss. Ethan took a deep breath, seemingly trying to maintain control. Olivia noticed that, despite his composed posture, he was emotionally unsettled. She wondered what kind of situations the boy might have endured to be so emotionally withdrawn. Something about the moment made her want to help, though she wasn't sure why. "He doesn't usually talk much to strangers." "Actually, he hasn't been talking much to anyone lately," Ethan confessed, his voice lower, as if he were talking to himself. Those words struck something deep in Olivia. It was as if Ethan were trying to reach his son, but didn't know how. She wanted to ask more, to understand what had happened to make the boy close himself off so completely. However, Ethan's emotional barrier made her hesitate. He was clearly someone who didn't open up easily. Olivia realized it was time to say goodbye. Ethan stood, taking Henry's hand, but the boy hesitated, glancing at Olivia as if holding on to her presence. "It was a pleasure meeting you both," she said softly. "If you ever need help, I have an office next to the Central Hospital. I work with children." Ethan only nodded, his eyes turning back to Henry, who watched Olivia with a quiet curiosity. Without another word, he turned and walked away, taking the boy with him. Olivia stood there, watching as they disappeared down the path, a strange sense of incompleteness filling her chest. In the days that followed, the memory of Henry and Ethan stayed with her. Something about that family seemed to call for help, yet she felt she shouldn't get involved, especially without knowing the full situation. No matter how hard she tried, Henry's gaze haunted her, and one question lingered in her mind. What could have led such a young child to bear such a profound silence? Then, one afternoon, while she was in her office, she received an unexpected call. It was a secretary of none other than Ethan Carter. He had found her number and wanted to schedule a session for Henry. That surprised her, especially given that a high-profile CEO had taken the time to reach out to her. In that moment, Olivia realized that the unexpected encounter in Central Park had not been a mere coincidence. Ethan seemed willing to try something to help his son, and perhaps this was the beginning of something she could never have anticipated. Days after the unexpected encounter in Central Park, Olivia was organizing files in her office when she heard firm knocks on the door. Before she could respond, her secretary, Ellen, announced the arrival of a visitor with an almost reverent tone. "Dr. Hayes, MF, Ethan Carter is here to see you." "It seems to be an urgent matter," she said, her eyes wide. That imposing presence stood out, even in a space usually frequented by children and their families. As she stood up, Olivia saw Ethan entering the office with the same serious expression he had in the park. He wasn't accompanied by Henry this time, but held a black leather folder firmly. She couldn't help but notice his posture strong and confident, contrasting sharply with the vulnerability she remembered seeing in Henry. Olivia extended her hand in greeting, and Ethan shook it with the same firmness as before. He studied her intently, as if deciding with each second whether this meeting truly made sense. "Dr. Hayes," he began, his voice calm but loaded with a restrained urgency. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice. I wanted to talk about my son, Henry." Olivia motioned for him to sit, trying to understand what had brought him to her. There was something in the direct way he looked at her that unsettled her, as if he were seeking reassurances before even beginning. "Of course, Mr. Carter. I have also kept Henry in mind since that day in the park." She paused, choosing her words carefully. He seemed hurt in a way that isn't typical for children his age. Ethan sighed deeply, momentarily breaking his cool exterior. He seemed reluctant to share any details, as if doing so meant admitting something he preferred to keep buried. "Henry has been through a lot over the past year," he admitted, keeping his gaze fixed on a point on the table. "My wife passed away in an accident, and since then, he hasn't been the same. He doesn't talk much, avoids contact, and..." Ethan hesitated, as if unsure whether he should continue. "I know I need help reaching him, but the truth is, I have no idea how to handle this." His words carried a vulnerability that caught Olivia by surprise. For the first time, she saw Ethan as a desperate father, not just the cold, calculating CEO. Olivia paused, absorbing the pain contained in his brief account. "Mr. Carter, losing his mother is an immense trauma for a child, especially one so young. And from what I've seen, he seems to bear this in a very intense way, perhaps more than is typical for his age." She observed him carefully. "How do you feel about him having regular therapy? It could truly help Henry process his grief and hopefully open up again." Ethan took a deep breath before responding, seeming to choose his words. "I've tried a few therapists before, but he doesn't connect with anyone." He looked at her, and his eyes reflected the frustration of a man struggling alone in a situation he didn't know how to solve. "However, I noticed he reacted to you. It was the first time I saw him next to someone unfamiliar and looking comfortable. That's rare, Dr. Hayes, and I don't know why, but I'd like to trust in that." That confession took Olivia by surprise, but it also made her realize the extent of the responsibility he was proposing. The idea of being a key figure in Henry's recovery was a considerable challenge, yet Olivia felt she could make a real difference. "I accept," she said without hesitation. "I'll take on Henry's case, but I need to be clear that my approach won't be quick. He needs time to build trust and open up, especially considering the kind of loss he's faced." Ethan nodded, his eyes analyzing her every word, as though evaluating a business proposal. He seemed more controlled now, his expression returning to its usual blend of professionalism and rigidity. "Time isn't an issue. The important thing is for Henry to be able to open up and, if possible, experience a bit of the childhood he deserves," replied Ethan, as a shadow of sadness passed over his face. "Dr. Hayes, I trust your ability. If you need anything, any resource, please let me know." Olivia agreed, and Ethan quickly explained how Henry's routine would adjust so he could participate in sessions. Before he left, he hesitated at the door, as if he wanted to say something more, but soon just said goodbye and left. The hallway fell silent, and Olivia allowed herself a deep sigh, absorbing the responsibility she had just taken on. The first few sessions with Henry were difficult. He arrived at the office accompanied by his nanny, who seemed hesitant to leave his side, as if wanting to protect something fragile. Henry always entered in silence, with a vacant gaze, avoiding any attempt at eye contact. He responded to Olivia's questions with small nods, rarely speaking. In the third session, Olivia decided to try a different approach. Instead of just talking, she brought a box of colored pencils and some sheets of paper to the office. She knew that children express their emotions in various ways, and perhaps he could open up more if he had an alternative way to communicate. "Today, I thought we'd try something different, Henry," she said, placing the paper and pencils on the table. "How about drawing something? It can be anything you want." Henry hesitated, looking at the pencils with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. After a moment, he picked up one of the pencils and began drawing slowly. Olivia watched him closely, trying to capture every detail, every color choice, every stroke. When he finished, Henry showed her the drawing. It was a simple sketch of a house with a cloudy sky above. The image lacked joy, instead carrying an evident sadness. Olivia understood that it was a reflection of the boy's deep feelings, an empty house without colors under a somber sky. "Is this where you live?" she asked softly. Henry simply nodded, looking away. His silence was almost tangible, a solid barrier Olivia knew would take time to overcome. In the following days, the routine between them began to solidify. Henry continued to draw, revealing a little more with each session. In one of his drawings, Olivia noticed he had included a female figure beside the house. It was a vague silhouette, but she knew exactly who it was. "That's your mother, isn't it, Henry?" she ventured. He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with tears, but without uttering a word. At that moment, Olivia felt a pang of pain for him, a child so young carrying such a heavy burden. And increasingly, she thought of Ethan. He was likely suffering in the same way, but kept himself in a cold armor, distant, denying himself any solace. A few days later, Ethan decided to accompany Henry to the office. Olivia greeted him with a discreet nod, and he sat outside while the session began. Watching through the hallway window, Ethan saw his son interacting with Olivia. There was a subtle trust there, a security he had never seen Henry display with anyone. At the end of the session, Ethan was waiting for Olivia outside. "Dr. Hayes, may I take a moment of your time?" he asked, his posture still rigid but his expression more open. She nodded, and the two of them moved to an empty consultation room to talk. "I really appreciate what you're doing for Henry," he began, and Olivia noticed a slight tremor in his voice. He's talking more at home, small things, but it's something." "That's a great sign," Olivia replied with a small smile. "Henry needs this time to feel safe, to know he can trust those around him." Ethan was silent for a moment, absorbing what she was saying. There was a tension in the air, as if he wanted to say something more personal, but hesitated. "You may have an idea of what I'm like, or at least what people think of me," he began carefully. "My focus has always been my work. I built this company from scratch, and maybe, in a way, that's distanced me from Henry, and from a lot of important things. I wasn't prepared for this. I don't know how to be the father he needs." Olivia felt the weight of sincerity in his words, and realized that Ethan, too, was dealing with his own type of emotional isolation. Mr. Carter, the pain and difficulty of raising a child alone aren't easy, especially at a time like this, but it's clear that you care. You're seeking help, and that says a lot about you as a father. The truth is, no one is prepared to face a loss like this, especially when we have someone so young depending on us. Olivia spoke softly, trying to show Ethan that he wasn't alone in his pain and that there was a way through, even if he couldn't yet see it. Ethan looked at her for a moment, as if he wanted to absorb every word she was saying. His expression was serious, but his eyes betrayed a vulnerability he probably didn't share with many people. In that moment, Olivia realized that Henry's situation was only part of a more complex story, where father and son were equally lost, both dealing with a loneliness that seemed to consume everything around them. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm messing everything up," Ethan confessed in a voice so low, it almost seemed like he was speaking to himself. "Henry, he used to be so joyful, always smiling, full of life. And now, every time I look at him, I can only see how much I failed to protect him." Olivia felt a pang in her chest hearing that. She was used to hearing parents express their doubts and fears, but something in Ethan's tone showed her that he carried a much greater burden. He seemed to be trying to keep control, to be the strong person he imagined Henry needed. But perhaps that was only increasing the distance between them. "Mr. Carter, no one has all the answers, but what matters is that you're here, trying. Henry needs a father, not someone perfect. He needs to know that you feel too, that you care too, and that together you can overcome this." Olivia paused, gauging his reaction. "And if I may offer some advice, maybe it would help to share more of your feelings with him. It doesn't have to be in words, but in gestures. Children sense much more than we realize." Ethan kept his gaze fixed on Olivia for a moment, as if he were evaluating the truth of her words. Slowly, he nodded, though his expression still showed a mixture of doubt and hesitation. Ethan was used to being the man who solved everything, the CEO who never hesitated. But here, in this office, he was being challenged to reveal his more human side. "I'll think about it," he replied, with a slight nod before getting up to leave. When Ethan left, Olivia returned to her office with her mind full of reflections. She knew that the journey to help Henry would be long and that her work wouldn't only involve the boy. There would be a dual challenge: to treat Henry and at the same time encourage Ethan to emotionally connect with him. Looking out the window, Olivia wondered how deeply the bond between Ethan and Henry could grow, and what it would take to break down the barriers that separated them. With each session, Olivia and Henry made incremental progress. Henry, still hesitant, showed small gestures of trust, a subtle smile, a more animated nod, or even a small comment about the drawings he made. Olivia noticed that he was allowing himself to feel safe, though the progress was slow and cautious. One afternoon, as Henry drew a more elaborate picture of a family, Olivia noticed a male figure in the background of the drawing, slightly blurred. "Is that your father?" she asked, pointing to the figure. Henry gave a slight nod, still without saying a word. "He seems to be distant, but he's always watching over you, right?" Olivia smiled, trying to facilitate communication with the boy. Henry looked at her attentively, as if pondering the truth of that statement. After a few seconds, Henry nodded. Olivia sensed he was trying to express something more, but fear seemed to hold him back. It was a clear reflection of a child who loved his father, but was too hurt to verbalize what he truly felt. "You know, Henry," Olivia continued gently, "sometimes adults have a strange way of showing they care. But what I know is that your father is trying, even if it doesn't always seem that way. Have you noticed that?" Henry looked at the drawing and remained silent. Olivia knew he needed time to process that. The process was delicate. Each word had to be carefully chosen not to frighten him, and each session needed to leave him with a seed of reflection. Several weeks passed, and one day, Ethan decided to watch the session from outside, observing the interaction between Olivia and Henry through the hallway window. He had never seen his son so focused, trying to respond to questions with nods or small gestures. Ethan watched as Olivia showed patience and tenderness that he had never witnessed anyone show toward Henry, and it stirred something in him in an unexpected way. For the first time, he questioned whether the distance he kept from his son was harming them both. At the end of the session, as Henry finished a drawing and Olivia organized her papers, Ethan gathered his courage and entered the room. He wanted to discuss his son's progress with Olivia and better understand what he could do to help. "Dr. Hayes, I'd like to understand how I can help Henry outside of here. I feel he's changing." But Ethan hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. "I don't know if I'm helping or hurting." Olivia gave a small smile, impressed by the change in Ethan's demeanor. She knew he was someone used to controlling everything, and that admitting his failures and doubts wasn't easy for him. "Well, the first thing is to keep showing him that you care," she replied calmly. "Henry needs to see that you're there for him, but not in a forced or intense way. He needs to feel he has the freedom to open up when he's ready. Ethan nodded, absorbing each word, and Olivia realized he was a determined man, someone willing to do anything to help his son. The problem was that he still tried to do everything in a practical, almost mechanical way, and to address his son's emotions, he would need to tap into his more vulnerable side. And something even more important, perhaps, Mr. Carter. Olivia paused, hesitating to continue. Henry needs to see that you miss his mother too, that you're hurting as well. That statement made Ethan look away, clearly uncomfortable. Olivia knew she had touched a sensitive point, but was convinced it was essential to Henry's recovery. It's not easy for me. He depends on me. I can't appear weak in front of him, he murmured, in a barely audible tone. In truth, showing him that you're also feeling pain might be exactly what he needs, Olivia replied gently. It doesn't mean being weak, Mr. Carter. It means showing that he's not alone in his sorrow. Ethan remained silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. This was new territory for him, and Olivia could see he was struggling against his instincts. She knew she was asking a lot, but if Henry was going to see his father as a true support, he would need to see that human side of him. In the following weeks, Olivia noticed small signs of progress. Henry was more receptive, beginning to respond with brief words, and sometimes even smiled. Ethan, though still with his rigid posture, made visible efforts to spend more time with his son, seeking to be more present in simple ways, like personally accompanying him to the office whenever possible. During one of these visits to the office, Ethan approached Olivia in the hallway, his eyes reflecting a restrained kind of gratitude. Dr. Hayes, I want to thank you for everything. I know there's still a lot to do, but what I see now in Henry gives me new hope. He hesitated, clearly unused to expressing such emotions. I can't quite explain it, but I feel like he's starting to come back to himself, at least a little. Olivia smiled. She knew there was a long journey ahead, but Henry's progress and Ethan's gradual change indicated they were on the right path. I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Carter, but there's still work ahead. And one of the most important things is that Henry sees your willingness to connect with him. You both need to create a space of comfort, something unforced and natural. Children are sensitive, and he'll pick up on it if there's any pressure. Ethan seemed to understand, and Olivia noticed he was genuinely willing to follow each piece of advice she gave. He was beginning to see that the path to Henry's healing might also be the start of his own. As she watched Ethan and Henry walk away that day, Olivia couldn't help but wonder how much that dynamic would continue to evolve. She found herself increasingly invested in the case, wondering just how much of a difference her presence could make for both of them. She felt that her work went beyond mere professional duty and sensed that perhaps she was only at the beginning of something much greater. Days after their initial therapy sessions, Olivia decided to try something new with Henry. She knew the atmosphere in the office, though safe, wasn't ideal for creating a deeper connection with him. There was an invisible barrier between them, one she sensed could only be broken outside the office walls. So on a cloudy Saturday morning, Olivia met Henry at a small children's bookstore tucked away in a quieter neighborhood in New York. It was the kind of place that invited silence and calm, with shelves full of illustrated books, fantastic stories, and cozy reading chairs. Olivia saw Henry enter, his gaze still cautious as he looked around the bookstore, with a mixture of curiosity and hesitation. He wasn't holding his father's hand, but Ethan was right behind him, watching carefully. She waved at Henry, encouraging him to explore the space. You know, Henry, she began, pointing to a shelf of classic books. When I was a child, the first time I went to a bookstore was with my grandfather. He always told me that a good book is like a friend. It can take you to places you never imagined. And you know what else? Each book here has a hidden world inside, just waiting to be discovered. Henry looked at her attentively, taking in every word. He said nothing, but seemed to be listening, and Olivia knew that was a positive sign. She picked up one of the books and showed it to him, carefully opening the cover. How about we take a look? She suggested with an encouraging smile. The boy hesitated, glancing at his father, who was sitting nearby in a chair, observing from a distance, as if wanting to ensure his son was safe. Ethan kept a watchful eye but didn't interfere. He just nodded subtly, leaving the decision to Henry. To Olivia's surprise, the boy came closer and sat beside her on the reading rug. Olivia opened the book and began turning the pages, showing the illustrations and explaining small parts of the story, unhurried, allowing Henry to go at his own pace. As the boy focused on the images, Olivia shared a small story from her own childhood, describing a visit to her grandparents' house and an imagined adventure. She talked about her fear of the dark and how she would seek comfort in the stories she read before bed. Carefully, she watched Henry's expression. He now seemed more relaxed, his shoulders less tense, almost as if he were somewhere else, far from his worries. Time passed softly, and Olivia noticed Henry give a small smile as he listened to her stories. It was a subtle expression, almost imperceptible, but enough for her to know she was on the right path. Ethan, seated in the armchair, watched every movement. He couldn't take his eyes off the interaction between Olivia and Henry, intrigued by the effect she seemed to have on his son. It was an expression he hadn't seen on Henry's face in a long time. The last time he remembered seeing his son smile like that was before his mother's death, and since then, any trace of joy had seemed erased from Henry's face. For Ethan, it was both moving and unsettling. The bond forming between Henry and Olivia caused him a mixture of relief and jealousy, a strange feeling that she was able to reach his son in a way he himself never could. Yet Ethan felt he had to stay present, observing every detail and protecting Henry from any kind of pain that might arise. When the reading ended, Olivia got up and approached Ethan, who had been watching from afar. "It seems he enjoyed being here," she commented with a gentle smile. Ethan nodded, his expression somewhat distant. "I never thought to bring him to a place like this. He used to be more the kind to run around, to be outdoors, you know. But I think he changed a lot after everything." His voice was a bit softer, reflecting the vulnerability he tried to hide. Olivia looked at the father for a moment. Ethan still maintained his rigid, controlled posture, but she noticed he was gradually allowing himself to relax in her presence. There was a subtle change in the way he spoke, a restrained openness that she noticed, even if he didn't. "Perhaps he has changed. Yes, but he's still a child, Ethan. He still has those interests. They're just hidden under the pain. And I think Henry is slowly showing he wants to explore the world again," Olivia replied. Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on his son, who was now examining other books in the children's section. He didn't want to admit it, but he felt powerless, a father trying to reach something out of his grasp, always striving to get it right, but failing to be vulnerable. The following week, Olivia invited Henry to a picnic in a nearby park. She knew he was still wary of crowded places, but it was important for him to reconnect with the outside world. The idea was simple: bring a few sandwiches and cookies, along with some board games and puzzles to keep him entertained. Ethan agreed to the idea, though he initially hesitated to leave him alone with Olivia. He knew it was irrational, but the desire to protect Henry was so intense that he almost withdrew his permission. However, seeing how his son was drawn to her, he relented. During the picnic, Olivia shared more stories from her childhood, describing her outdoor games and how she used to collect pebbles on walks through the parks. She encouraged Henry to do the same, and the boy, though shy, picked up a few stones, examining them curiously. Her presence seemed to give him the security he needed to explore his surroundings, even if timidly. After a while, Olivia sat beside him and began to build a small tower with the stones he had gathered. Henry watched in silence, then soon started imitating her, carefully balancing the stones. His expression was one of deep concentration, and Olivia couldn't help but feel a profound affection for the boy, who was, in a way, finding a way to express his emotions through small gestures. "Did you know that when I was little, I thought stones had magical powers?" she asked, smiling at him. Henry looked up at her, intrigued. "Really?" he asked softly, one of the few times he spoke voluntarily. Olivia nodded, as if sharing a special secret with him. "Yes, I believe that if I arranged the stones in the right order, they could make wishes come true." "Do you have any wishes, Henry?" He was silent for a moment, his gaze lost in the stones, and then he shook his head. But Olivia knew that within him was a storm of feelings he couldn't yet express. Then, to her surprise, Henry picked up one of the stones and held it tightly in his hand, closing his eyes for a moment. She remained silent, respecting his moment. After a few seconds, Henry opened his eyes and looked at her, a faint spark of emotion in his gaze. Without saying a word, he resumed stacking stones with her, silently but more at ease. Olivia felt a wave of emotion. That small gesture of closing his eyes and holding the stone was a step. Maybe it wasn't a wish he could verbalize, but it was a sign he was beginning to open up to her. Later, when Ethan came to pick him up, Olivia updated him on the progress. Henry is starting to express himself, even if it's in very subtle ways. He's still holding a lot inside, but these quiet moments we've shared have been helping. He trusts me, Ethan, and that's a big step for him. Ethan listened intently, and she noticed the relief in his eyes. However, he kept a serious demeanor, holding himself as if still not fully convinced, or perhaps not wanting to show emotion. That's truly remarkable. He's never trusted anyone so quickly. Sometimes I'm surprised he's opening up with you, Ethan admitted in a low, almost inaudible tone. Olivia understood this was the maximum vulnerability he could express. Ethan still had evident reservations, but she sensed he was trying to overcome them for his son's sake. As she watched Henry leave with his father, Olivia felt that Ethan needed to become more deeply involved in the process. Henry's progress was clear, but for him to truly flourish, Ethan would need to set aside his protective and reserved stance, allowing his son to see that he was emotionally there for him too. She knew the trust and bond between them needed to grow stronger, but recognized this would be a challenge. The following week, Olivia scheduled a new session for Henry, but this time, she requested that Ethan participate in the activity. She knew he might hesitate, but was determined to integrate him into the therapeutic process. So when Ethan entered the room with Henry, she invited him to join them, explaining that his presence could be beneficial for his son's progress. Carter, I thought of something different for today. I'd like to invite you to join the session if you're willing. I think Henry might feel more comfortable seeing that you're both on this journey together, Olivia suggested, with an encouraging smile. Ethan looked surprised by the invitation. He hesitated for a moment, but when he saw Henry watching him intently, he nodded and sat down beside his son. Olivia sensed a subtle tension in the air, but that was normal. Both father and son were adjusting to this new dynamic. She then took out a set of illustrated cards, designed to help children describe feelings and thoughts in a relaxed way. The cards displayed images of animals and different scenarios, meant to encourage children to express emotions more playfully. Henry, why don't you choose a card? Olivia suggested. Henry looked at the cards and selected one featuring a puppy hiding under a table, looking frightened. Olivia noticed the choice and asked gently, "Why did you choose this card, Henry?" He looked at the image for a few seconds and then replied in an almost inaudible tone, "Because he's scared." Those words made Olivia's heart ache. For the first time, Henry was verbalizing something about his own emotional state. It was a huge step, and she knew Ethan also felt the impact of that confession. "It's okay to feel scared, Henry. Everyone feels it at some point," Olivia said softly. "Do you have someone to help you in those moments of fear?" Henry averted his gaze, as if trying to process the question, and then glanced briefly at his father without saying anything. Ethan noticed the look, and something changed in his expression. He seemed to understand that this was a silent request from Henry, a way for his son to express that he needed him more than he had ever said. From that moment on, Olivia sensed the bond between them beginning to strengthen. Ethan, though still somewhat hesitant, started asking simple questions, encouraging his son to open up more. The rigidity he had always carried was beginning to dissolve, though slowly and carefully. Days later, Olivia invited them again for an activity outside the office. They would visit the city zoo together, a place where Henry could freely explore, distracted by the curiosities around him. Ethan agreed, though he still showed slight apprehension about the proposal. However, Olivia knew this was an opportunity for father and son to interact in a different, natural setting. At the zoo, Henry seemed more animated than usual. He looked at the animals with a mix of fascination and wonder, something he hadn't shown in previous sessions. Ethan observed closely, taking in every expression of his son, as if trying to understand this side of him that was emerging slowly. At one point, upon seeing a group of lions, Henry approached the fence, pulling his father closer and pointing to the animals. "Dad, look, they're like real lions," he said, with an expression of joy Ethan hadn't seen in a long time. Ethan knelt to be at Henry's level and smiled, a genuine smile of relief. "They sure are, son. And did you know that lions are very protective of their families? They'll do anything to care for each other," he said, trying to create a moment of connection. Olivia watched from a distance, moved. For the first time, Henry seemed to be opening up to his father naturally, without the usual rigidity or fear. The interaction between them was spontaneous, and Ethan, who typically maintained a controlled and reserved stance, allowed himself to be simply a present, accessible father for his son. Throughout the outing, Olivia encouraged small gestures of connection between father and son. They shared a snack, laughed together at a family of monkeys making faces, and finally, Henry insisted on buying a small stuffed lion toy, which he proudly carried for the rest of the day. As they walked back to the parking lot, Ethan held his son's hand naturally, as if the gesture had been a part of their routine all along. Henry seemed comfortable, almost safe, and Olivia was certain that this was one of the most significant moments for the boy since the start of the process. At the end of the day, as Ethan and Henry said goodbye to Olivia, Ethan called her aside for a quick, private conversation. "Dr. Hayes, Olivia, I don't know how to thank you. Today was special." "I saw a side of Henry the first thought I'd lost forever," he confessed, his voice low but filled with sincerity. Olivia smiled, touched by Ethan's genuine gratitude. "Henry is rediscovering parts of himself, Ethan, and that's because of your effort to be by his side. These moments, as simple as they may seem, have a huge impact on his recovery, and deep down, I believe they're helping you too." Ethan was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. He seemed to be reflecting on her words, as if he were realizing what it meant to truly be present for his son. "I never thought seeing my son smile again would bring me peace. I think I spent so much time focused on work and trying to hide my pain that I ended up distancing myself from everything that really matters," he murmured, as if speaking more to himself. Olivia nodded, understanding the depth of his confession. Ethan was, for the first time, recognizing his own mistakes and allowing himself to be vulnerable. She realized that this moment was crucial for both father and son, and that the healing process was extending to Ethan, who was beginning to confront his own feelings. "This is all a process, Ethan, and you're walking it together." Henry senses that, even if he can't yet put everything he feels into words, Olivia responded encouragingly. "Your shared pain is part of what connects you, but you can turn it into something positive." Ethan looked at her with an expression of gratitude and relief. For the first time, he seemed to believe there was a way forward, a path he could walk with his son to rebuild trust and connection between them. In the days that followed, Ethan began making small changes to his routine with Henry. He dedicated more time to being present, and Olivia noticed that with each session, the boy showed more security and willingness to interact. The emotional walls he had built were beginning to crumble, revealing a new Henry, more willing to explore the world and trust those around him. With each smile, each laugh Henry shared, Olivia saw the reflection of the effort and patience that everyone was putting into this process. She knew the road was long, but she was confident that together, they could rebuild this small family that, though shaken, was showing resilience. And so, over time, Olivia and Henry continued creating moments of connection, and Ethan, who initially observed them from a distance, now allowed himself to stand beside them, participating, living, and little by little, healing himself as he helped his son heal his own wounds. On a chilly autumn afternoon, Olivia and Ethan sat side by side in the park after one of Henry's sessions. Ethan, a bit more relaxed than usual, stared into the distance, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. Olivia sensed an emotional tension in him, as if he were weighing his words carefully before speaking. It was evident that something deeper was troubling him, and that he might be on the verge of sharing a part of himself that he had kept locked away until now. "Ethan, you seem distant today. Is there some progress with Henry that you'd like to discuss?" she asked, attempting to break the silence in a gentle way. Ethan looked away and took a deep breath, as if he needed courage to reveal something painful and long suppressed. He glanced at Olivia with a vulnerability she rarely saw and hesitated before beginning to speak. "Olivia, I think I owe you some answers. It's the least I can do, considering that you're helping Henry to open up. Maybe I also need to be honest about some things." She nodded, giving him the space he needed, watching as he seemed to organize his thoughts before continuing. He then turned his gaze back to the horizon and began to speak, his voice low and filled with painful memories. "I lost my wife a little over a year ago," he said, his tone bitter. "It was a car accident. She was coming home from a trip and..." He paused, swallowing hard. The emotional weight of that memory was evident, and she never made it back. Olivia felt a pang in her chest. She could see that the pain was still very real for him, still consuming him in a way he tried to hide. She didn't interrupt. She knew this kind of confession needed to flow at his own pace. "Since that day," Ethan continued, looking away, almost ashamed, "I became a sort of ghost. I didn't know how to handle the loss. Suddenly, I found myself alone with Henry, and everything that once felt secure crumbled." Olivia remained silent, feeling the weight of his words, understanding the depth of the pain he carried. Ethan's rigid exterior was beginning to crack, revealing a man who, despite all the success and security he projected, was devastated by insecurities and regrets. "I didn't grow up in a loving home," he continued, his voice almost a whisper. "My parents were always distant. I was raised with rules, goals, expectations, but never with affection, never with encouragement. They thought showing emotions was a sign of weakness." Ethan paused, and Olivia could see that his past was as heavy as the recent trauma of losing his wife. "My parents always encouraged me to be independent, to achieve things on my own. I don't think I ever had an emotional bond with them. They were always too busy, traveling for business meetings and dedicating their lives to work. And ironically, I think I inherited that coldness. I became exactly what I hated: someone who shut down, who avoided showing any sign of vulnerability." Olivia began to see the bigger picture. Ethan had built his life on independence, achievements, and a pragmatic view of the world, but he had never learned to create genuine bonds, to give and receive affection. Now, as a father, he found himself unarmed, without the emotional tools that Henry desperately needed. "And then, when she was gone, everything got worse," Ethan continued, his eyes fixed on the ground. "I was even more lost. Henry stopped talking, and honestly, I didn't know what to do. I threw myself into work because it was the only thing I knew how to do well, the only thing I could control. But the emptiness..." He paused, as if gathering strength to continue. "The emptiness just grew." Olivia placed her hand gently on his shoulder, a gesture of comfort. It wasn't easy for him, that much was clear, but the fact that he was willing to share these parts of himself showed a new openness. He was trying to change, trying to build something with his son. "Ethan, I'm so sorry for everything you've been through. I can't imagine how difficult it must have been. But I want you to know that, for Henry, you are what remains of safety, what's left of family. He needs you not as the CEO, not as the provider, but as a father." She paused, watching to see if he was absorbing her words. "He needs to see that you also miss her, that you also suffer." Ethan seemed to take in each word, but he still hesitated, showing him that "it feels terrifying," he admitted, looking at Olivia with sincerity. "It's like I'm incapable of being vulnerable, as if that would weaken the image of a father he needs. My instinct is to protect him from that, to keep him away from any additional pain. But the truth, Ethan, is that hiding what you feel might push him even further away. Showing that you also miss her, that you're also dealing with pain, can help him understand that he's not alone in his suffering." Children are incredibly perceptive. They sense much more than we imagine. Ethan nodded, thoughtful, but he still looked uncomfortable. He knew she was right, but putting it into practice was another challenge. In the days that followed, Olivia noticed that Ethan was more present during Henry's sessions, trying to establish small interactions during and after each session. Henry seemed to open up a bit more each time, responding to questions with short but meaningful words. One afternoon, after an especially positive session, Olivia approached Ethan, suggesting a new activity for him and Henry, a simple fun evening of cooking together at home. How about the two of you make a pizza together? It's a great way to have fun and interact without the pressure of a deep conversation. Cooking has its own magic, and kids love it, she suggested, trying to encourage him. Ethan hesitated, but eventually agreed. He knew that any opportunity to connect with Henry was a chance to regain something he feared had been lost forever. That night, back at the apartment, Ethan organized everything for the pizza making. Henry seemed excited, and Ethan could hardly remember the last time his son had shown such interest in something at home. They were in the kitchen, ingredients spread out on the counter. Henry looked at his father with a mix of curiosity and anticipation. Ready to make a mess? Ethan joked with a light smile. Henry gave a small smile, and together they began mixing the dough. Ethan demonstrated each step, trying to keep the moment light, and Henry followed the instructions closely. The atmosphere filled with a relaxed energy Ethan never imagined possible. He found himself laughing with his son, spilling sauce and flour, without worrying about cleaning up every detail like he usually did. "Should we add the cheese now?" Henry asked, for the first time taking the initiative in the process. Ethan smiled, proud, watching his son actively engage. He grabbed a handful of cheese and, to Henry's surprise, tossed a bit on his head, laughing. Henry looked at him, surprised, and then started laughing too, a true, infectious laugh. It was a sound that warmed Ethan's heart, something he feared he might never hear again. In that moment, he felt that maybe, just maybe, he could indeed be the father Henry needed. He realized that if he was willing to face his past and open his heart, he could build a new reality for both of them. Olivia followed Ethan's updates on Henry's progress with satisfaction and pride. Each time he shared a small victory, like making pizza, she felt they were truly building something solid. She knew Ethan still carried the weight of a painful past and an emotionally distant upbringing, but it was clear he was willing to change. During one of their meetings, Ethan surprised Olivia with an unexpected request. "Olivia, do you think I could meet other parents who've been through similar situations? Maybe I need some guidance on how to move forward. I never considered it, but now I see it could help." Olivia smiled, admiring his willingness to seek help. It was a huge step for someone as independent as he was. "I know of a few support groups for parents dealing with grief and emotional challenges. I can suggest some that might be helpful. And beyond that, I think you'll feel less alone in this process," she replied with an encouraging look. Ethan looked relieved, as if a new door had opened for him. In the following weeks, he began attending meetings, listening to other parents, and gradually sharing his own story. The experience was revealing, showing him that grief and parenthood were challenges shared by many others. Gradually, Ethan allowed himself to share his pain and doubts with people who deeply understood. He began to see he wasn't alone, and that there were other ways to handle his loss, to rebuild his connection with his son, and to find new meaning in life. As the weeks passed, Ethan noticed the positive impact of these meetings on his relationship with Henry. He was learning to deal with his own emotions, recognizing that grief was a continuous process, but that he didn't have to face it alone. He also began to understand that showing his emotions wasn't a sign of weakness, but a way to grow closer to his son, to show him that he too was vulnerable, that he was human. On a chilly afternoon, Ethan and Olivia arranged to meet to evaluate Henry's progress and the changes in the father-son relationship. They met at a cafe near Olivia's office, where the cozy, quiet environment encouraged an easy conversation. Ethan seemed lighter, with a less rigid expression than Olivia was used to seeing. He smiled slightly when he saw her and settled in at the table, clearly ready to share his recent experiences. "Olivia, I can't thank you enough for encouraging me to seek help. I never thought these meetings could benefit me, but being with others who understand this loss, it's been transformative," he admitted, his eyes full of gratitude. "And I know Henry feels the difference too." Olivia felt genuine joy hearing this. She knew each step Ethan took to confront his past also brought him closer to Henry and helped them build a new family dynamic. "I'm so happy for you, Ethan. Henry needs a father who acknowledges and shares his own pain. This bond, this honesty you're building with him, is something he'll carry with him for life," Olivia responded. smiling with encouragement. Ethan nodded, visibly moved. For the first time, he seemed at peace with himself, embracing the changes happening within. And with Henry, is there anything more we can do to continue encouraging his progress? Ethan asked, showing genuine concern. Olivia thought for a moment and then suggested something that she knew would be challenging, but also a unique opportunity. Ethan, perhaps it's time for you to share something more personal about his mother with Henry. He misses her, but I don't think he's ever heard a story about her from you. Sometimes, learning more about the person we lost helps maintain the connection, helps us understand that the love remains, even if the person is no longer here. Ethan fell silent, absorbing the suggestion. The idea of sharing memories of his wife with Henry was both painful and comforting. He knew he was ready to open this emotional space, but he wasn't sure how to do it without falling apart. However, something in his expression showed Olivia he was willing to try. That night, as he tucked Henry into bed, Ethan took a family photo he kept in his room. In it, Henry was just a baby, and his wife was smiling while holding their son in her arms. He brought the photo to Henry's room and sat beside him on the bed, with a gentle look of nostalgia and tenderness. Henry looked at the photo with curiosity, and upon recognizing his mother, his expression softened. "This was one of the first pictures we took with you, Henry. Your mom and I were so happy. She always said you were the most beautiful baby in the world," Ethan said, his voice low and trembling but full of love. Henry listened attentively, his eyes shining, and he moved closer to his father, absorbing every word, every fragment of memory. "Dad, do you miss her?" Henry asked in a whisper. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the emotion intensify, but he decided this was the moment to be honest, to let his son know that he too carried the weight of missing her. "Yes, Henry, I miss her very much. But you know, she always said you were our little piece of joy, that you'd take care of us even after she was gone. She loved you more than anything," Ethan replied, his voice choked with emotion. Henry nodded, and for the first time, he held his father's hand tightly, offering innocent comfort that for Ethan meant the world. In that moment, Ethan realized that his connection with Henry was strengthening, that they were learning to heal their wounds together. At the end of that week, Ethan met Olivia again to share the recent events. He recounted the conversation with Henry and how much he felt it had brought them closer. "Olivia, I never imagined that sharing something so personal would help, but I think it was exactly what he needed," he admitted, his gaze sincere and grateful. She smiled, satisfied, knowing Ethan had taken an important step not only for his son, but for himself. "That's wonderful, Ethan. Henry now knows he's not alone in his pain, and that helps build trust between you. He understands that you feel too, and that's essential for your bond." Ethan nodded, feeling empowered by finding a way to be more present and genuine with his son. He knew there was still much to work on, but the progress was clear and real, and he was grateful for every step he was taking alongside Henry. As he left Olivia's office, Ethan felt different. He knew there was still a long journey ahead, but for the first time in a long while, he looked to the future with hope. He and Henry were rebuilding their lives, and with Olivia's help, they were discovering that even after pain, there was room for a new form of love and connection. Days after Ethan and Henry's conversation about memories of his mother, Olivia suggested new strategies to keep strengthening the bond between father and son. However, for Ethan, these suggestions started to feel intrusive, as if he were constantly being evaluated and criticized. With each meeting with Olivia, he felt a mixture of gratitude and frustration, something he didn't know how to express. While he saw the changes in Henry, he was also uncomfortable with the idea that someone from outside was, in a way, shaping his relationship with his son. That afternoon, during a conversation in her office, Olivia suggested that Ethan try more emotional, reflective activities with Henry, like sharing a story or a memory whenever he put him to bed. She believed that creating an emotional routine between the two could help Henry develop a deeper sense of security and connection. "I know you've already taken a big step by sharing a memory with him, Ethan," Olivia said with an encouraging smile. "But I think it's important to keep going. Creating a sharing routine is essential for him to feel you're emotionally present. Ethan crossed his arms, his expression hardening. He was beginning to feel that Olivia was overstepping by dictating every detail of his relationship with his son. "Olivia, I understand that you're an expert, but this is starting to feel like a formula, something too forced. Henry is my son, and I also know what's best for him," he replied, trying to keep his tone controlled. But his discomfort was evident. Olivia, surprised by his curt response, stayed calm. "I understand, Ethan, and I never meant to interfere with what you think is best for him. But I want you to know that Henry is responding positively to every new connection you create. He needs you emotionally, and part of that is this constant openness. I'm not setting rules, just trying to help," she explained softly. Ethan, however, seemed even more irritated by her explanation. For him, the idea of constantly exposing his feelings to his son felt like a burden. "Constant emotional openness? That's not natural for me, Olivia. And frankly, I don't like the idea of being analyzed for every action I take with my own son," he said in a firm, defensive tone. "It feels like you're invading my life, questioning me as a father, as if I don't know what I'm doing." Olivia took a deep breath, understanding the intensity of his frustration. She knew Ethan was proud and had difficulty handling criticism, especially on something as personal as fatherhood. But she couldn't ignore the fact that he needed to confront these feelings to keep helping Henry. "Ethan, I've never questioned your ability as a father," she responded, trying to keep her voice steady. "But Henry went through a trauma, and so did you. I believe that you both still need help dealing with it. Maybe it's not natural for you, but it's been important for Henry, and he needs a father who's willing to adapt to help him." Her response seemed to hit Ethan deeply. He stared at her for a moment, his face hardening, as if trying to contain his anger. "You know, Olivia, sometimes it feels like you think you understand everything about us, that you know what we've been through, but you don't know what this is like. You don't know what it's like to deal with everything alone, to see your child suffer and have no idea how to help," he retorted, his voice filled with bitterness. "You think you know our pain?" Olivia felt his words like a blow. There was a clear line that Ethan was drawing, one driven by his frustration and sense of being invaded. But at the same time, she felt she needed to be honest about her own experience. "Ethan," she began, her tone now more serious, "it's not something I share often, but yes, I know what it's like to lose someone and feel your whole world collapse. I know what it's like to face pain without anyone to share the weight, and I know how deeply it leaves its marks." Ethan looked at her, surprised. For the first time, he realized that Olivia, with all her calm and confidence, also carried hidden pain. This unexpected revelation made him feel a new kind of empathy for her, something he didn't know how to process. Olivia's voice was soft, but there was a strength in her words he had never perceived before. "I lost someone who meant everything to me, Ethan, and that led me to choose this profession, to help others who have faced the same pain," Olivia continued, her voice trembling but resolute. "I know it's hard. I know opening your heart sometimes feels impossible, but it's a choice I made because I believe pain can transform us if we have the courage to face it." The tension in the air was palpable. Ethan was speechless, taken aback by Olivia's unexpected vulnerability. He realized he had misjudged her intentions and that her pain was genuine. Perhaps she was trying to show him that he could follow a similar path of healing. I didn't know," he said, his voice now lower, almost a whisper. "I'm sorry for being so harsh." Olivia nodded, accepting his apology with a gentle smile. "It's all right, Ethan. I know this is difficult, and you have every right to feel like things are slipping out of your control. But please know that I'm here to help, not to judge. Henry is the focus here, and everything I suggest is for his sake," she explained, trying to ease the tension between them. Ethan sighed, seeming calmer now but still visibly moved by Olivia's revelation. He knew he had overreacted and felt ashamed for letting his frustration spill out that way. Still, the unexpected connection between them seemed to have opened a new understanding. "Olivia, I know I've been resistant, and maybe that's because of my own fears and my struggle to trust." He paused, searching for the right words. "But I'm trying, and it helps to know that you understand this pain. Helps me accept that maybe I don't have to face it all alone." She nodded, feeling the sincerity in his words and understanding the depth of his confession. For the first time, Olivia saw that Ethan was genuinely willing to confront his insecurities and open himself to a new way of connecting with Henry. "Trust isn't easy, Ethan, especially when we've been hurt so many times. But know that I'm here to support you and Henry, even when things get tough," she said, with a kindness that dissolved the remaining tension between them. The look they shared carried something new, a blend of understanding, respect, and a shared vulnerability. They had crossed a line in that moment, a line of openness and honesty that hadn't existed before. And both felt that, despite the initial discomfort, that unexpected connection could be a strength to help them move forward. In the days that followed, the tension between them eased, and a gentler dynamic began to form. Ethan still felt a certain resistance to accepting all of Olivia's suggestions, but now he approached them with a fresh perspective, knowing she understood the depth of his pain. There was a quiet respect between them, a connection that, even without words, seemed to be understood by both. Henry, for his part, seemed increasingly at ease. With each session, he showed small signs of progress, small interactions that indicated he was slowly regaining confidence in the world around him. Olivia noticed that the conversations and moments of sharing between father and son were making a difference, and the atmosphere between them was visibly transforming. One afternoon, after a successful session with Henry, Olivia found Ethan waiting outside. He looked more serene, with a light smile on his face. "Olivia, I wanted to thank you for everything. I know I was resistant at first, and I guess that's my way of dealing with things," he said sincerely, his eyes meeting hers with a gratitude that didn't need words. Olivia smiled, feeling that all the effort was finally bearing fruit. "I'm glad you're letting things happen at Henry's pace. And at yours too, Ethan. You're both progressing, and that's what matters most," she replied, satisfied with the work they were doing together. Ethan nodded, his gaze softer, and with an admiration for Olivia that he could no longer hide. There was something about her that made him feel safe, that encouraged him to keep facing his limitations. Without even admitting it to himself, he knew that, in some way, Olivia had become an essential presence in his life. She wasn't just Henry's therapist. She was helping Ethan rebuild himself, discover a new side of himself he never knew existed. In the following days, Ethan realized that his feelings for Olivia had shifted. The professional admiration was slowly transforming into something more personal, a mix of gratitude and something deeper that he hesitated to acknowledge. The tension that had surfaced between them after their confrontation now left traces of a more intense connection, something both seemed to feel but neither dared to address directly. Olivia also noticed the change. On several occasions, she found herself thinking about Ethan outside the professional context, reflecting on the vulnerability he showed when they were together and the strength he displayed in confronting his painful past. She knew that, as much as she tried to remain impartial, her relationship with him and with Henry had become special. Gradually, interactions between Ethan and Henry continued to improve. Ethan allowed himself to be more spontaneous, incorporating Olivia's suggestions more naturally. He began to see that he didn't need to follow every piece of advice precisely, but could adapt each idea to his own style, letting his personality shine in his relationship with Henry. And Henry, in turn, seemed to open up more each week, appearing more confident and smiling with a frequency that neither Ethan nor Olivia had anticipated at the start of treatment. On a sunny day, at the end of a walk with Henry and Olivia, Ethan pulled her aside and, with a different light in his eyes, said, "Olivia, I really don't know where we'd be without your help. You weren't just Henry's therapist. You helped both of us in a way I could never have imagined." She smiled, trying to hold back her emotion. "I'm so happy to see you two progressing. You've become an important part of my life as well, Ethan." They exchanged a look filled with understanding and warmth, and though neither spoke it aloud, both knew they were building something special, something beyond pain and therapy, something that could change their lives forever. That night, as he walked home, Ethan felt that maybe he was ready for a new beginning, and he knew that, somehow, Olivia and Henry would be by his side on that journey, bringing hope and light to a path that had once seemed impenetrably dark. That afternoon, Olivia's office was filled with a gentle light streaming through the windows, creating a cozy and safe atmosphere for Henry. He sat on the rug beside Olivia, holding his stuffed lion, the toy he had picked with his dad on their trip to the zoo. Olivia observed how he was gradually becoming more comfortable in the office, exploring small activities she suggested. Though still reserved, he was beginning to express himself through gestures and drawings. "Henry, I thought we could play a story game today. How about it?" she suggested, placing a picture book of animals in front of him. The boy looked at the book with curiosity and opened it to a page showing a family of elephants. Olivia noticed a spark in his eyes, and her intuition told her she might be on the verge of something important. "Look at that. It looks like a family of elephants, doesn't it?" she commented, observing his reaction. "What do you think they're doing?" Henry, usually silent, looked at the image and, to Olivia's surprise, murmured softly, almost as if talking to himself, "They're going home." The words, spoken so timidly, completely caught Olivia off guard. It was the first time he had said something so spontaneously, without direct encouragement. She smiled, holding back her emotion so as not to startle him. "Going home. I like that, Henry. Where do you think their home is?" she encouraged, keeping her tone gentle and natural, trying to extend this unique moment. Henry gave a small smile and pointed to the picture. "There, where they're all together." Olivia felt a wave of tenderness and understanding as she grasped the meaning behind Henry's words. Home for Henry, like for the elephants, was a place where he felt safe and loved, something he was gradually starting to rebuild with his father. This interaction was a clear sign that, after so long in silence, Henry was beginning to allow himself to express his feelings and thoughts. For Olivia, this moment was more than just progress. It was a milestone. After so many sessions and patience, seeing Henry open up, even in a few words, was proof that he was on the path to healing. Later that day, Olivia called Ethan, excited to share the news. Her voice was full of enthusiasm, and Ethan could tell that something important had happened. "Ethan, today was a very special day. Henry spoke a few words to me during the session," she said, her tone filled with warmth. "He looked at a picture and said the elephants were going home, and to him, home is where everyone is together." On the other end of the line, Ethan was silent for a moment, trying to process what he had just heard. This was the moment he had been longing for, but now that it had finally happened, he didn't know how to react. Henry's words struck him deeply, stirring a mix of joy and a profound ache as he realized just how much his son had missed a home, a complete, safe family. He actually spoke. Ethan murmured, his voice choked with emotion. "Olivia, I don't even know what to say. This is incredible." Olivia smiled, understanding the depth of his emotions. "I know, Ethan." Henry opened up because he feels safe, that he's in a welcoming environment. "This is thanks to the changes you've been making for him." Ethan took a deep breath, letting her words sink in. As much as he felt happy, part of him still feared he might not be able to sustain this progress with Henry. He knew he wasn't a perfect father and that he still carried numerous insecurities. I want to celebrate this with him, but I don't know how to do it, Olivia. I don't know how to show him just how happy this makes me, how much it means. It's like I don't know how to really open up." Olivia knew this was a delicate moment. Ethan was being brutally honest, acknowledging his emotional limitations and the difficulty he felt in showing vulnerability. "Ethan, I understand. You've been working so hard to be strong, to protect him from everything, that showing your vulnerable side might feel frightening," she replied in a compassionate tone. "But that's exactly what Henry needs now. He needs to see that you care, that you're there with an open heart. You don't have to be perfect, Ethan. You just have to be sincere." Ethan listened intently, letting her words guide him. He knew Olivia was right, and that the only way to connect more deeply with his son was to be authentic, setting aside his fear of failing. That evening, Ethan decided to take a simple, natural approach. He prepared a special dinner for him and Henry, something they hadn't done together in a long time. He bought Henry's favorite food, and to create a relaxed atmosphere, he chose a children's movie they used to watch as a family before Henry's mother had passed away. During dinner, Ethan tried his best to keep things light, sharing funny little stories from his own childhood, memories Henry always enjoyed hearing. The boys seemed at ease and even laughed at a few of his dad's jokes, which filled Ethan with hope. When the movie ended, Ethan sat beside his son on the couch, gathering the courage to open up more sincerely. "Henry, today Olivia told me that you said something very special to her. About a home," he began, his voice soft and filled with affection. Henry looked at his father with a curious expression, but didn't say anything. He was simply listening closely. "I want you to know that this made me really happy, son. I know you've been through a lot, and it's been hard, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, always, and that you can talk to me about anything, whenever you're ready." Henry seemed to take in every word, his eyes showing a shy glimmer of emotion. Ethan took a deep breath, and before ending the conversation, added something he had never thought he would say out loud. "I know you miss Mom, Henry. I miss her a lot too. And together, we're still a family, even if sometimes it feels hard. Whenever you want to talk about it, I'll be here." At that moment, Henry did something that took Ethan completely by surprise. He slowly leaned toward his father and hugged him, something he rarely did since his mother's passing. It was a shy but genuine hug, and Ethan felt his son's small hands around his shoulders. He returned the hug, closing his eyes for a moment, letting that connection strengthen him. For Ethan, that simple gesture from Henry was confirmation that he was, little by little, reaching his son in a way that had once seemed impossible. The next morning, Ethan met with Olivia to update her on the special night he had spent with Henry and the unexpected hug. He seemed like a different man, lighter, as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Olivia, I can't thank you enough for everything. Last night, Henry, he hugged me. It was such a small thing, but to me, it was like he was telling me that everything's okay." Olivia smiled, visibly moved. She knew just how much that moment meant for both Ethan and Henry. "Ethan, I'm so proud of both of you. This is the result of your effort, of your courage to be vulnerable. Henry feels safe, and that reflects the trust you're building between you two. You're learning to be the father he needs, just by being yourself." Ethan nodded, feeling truly seen and understood. His admiration for Olivia deepened with each conversation, and he realized how essential she had been in his journey. As he left the office, Ethan reflected on everything he had experienced over the past few weeks and the path he and Henry were forging. For the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful in his role as a father, a hope that Olivia had helped nurture. And he knew that, with this newfound strength and with Henry by his side, he could build a family marked not by perfection, but by the genuine love and presence that united them more with each passing day. On Saturday morning, Ethan was preparing for another quiet weekend with Henry when his son surprised him with a request. As they ate breakfast together, Henry looked up at him, his eyes filled with a hopeful gleam. "Dad, do you think maybe Olivia could come with us today?" he asked, his voice shy but full of anticipation. Caught off guard, Ethan took a few seconds to respond. Since Henry's recent progress, the boy had been increasingly expressive and, more importantly, felt comfortable enough to ask for Olivia's company. For Ethan, this was a clear sign that Henry saw Olivia as a comforting and safe presence in his life. "Of course, son. I'm sure Olivia would love to join us," he replied, smiling. "And what would you like to do?" Henry thought for a moment, and then, with an excited smile, suggested, "Can we go to the amusement park? We haven't been there in a long time." Ethan remembered the last time they had gone to a park together, back when Henry's mother was still with them. He hesitated briefly, but realized this was the perfect opportunity to create a new memory with his son. He agreed, and after a quick phone call to Olivia, they arranged the details for their family outing. Later that morning, the three of them met at the entrance to the amusement park. Ethan noticed how Henry's eyes lit up as Olivia approached, and he couldn't help but smile, sensing the positive energy she brought to the day. Olivia, for her part, was deeply touched by Henry's invitation. She felt honored to be part of such a special moment. As soon as they entered the park, Henry was captivated by the rides, rediscovering a world of fun and laughter that had felt distant for so long. Olivia and Ethan walked alongside him, watching his excitement as he tried to decide which attraction to try first. "Let's go on the Ferris wheel," Henry suggested, pointing to the towering structure at the center of the park. Ethan and Olivia exchanged a smile and followed him to the Ferris wheel line. Once they were seated in the cabin, Henry sat between them, holding both their hands tightly as the wheels slowly lifted them, offering a wide view of the park and the city beyond. As they rose, Henry gazed in awe at the scenery, and for a moment, Ethan and Olivia simply let themselves be immersed in the calm of the moment. "Everything okay up there, Henry?" Olivia asked, smiling at the sight of the boy so engaged with the experience. He nodded, giving her a small smile. "Yes, and thank you for coming, Olivia. I really wanted you to be here with us," he said softly, his voice both timid and sincere. His words melted Olivia's heart, and she glanced at Ethan, seeing that he was just as moved by his son's genuine gratitude. For both of them, this was a victory, a sign that Henry was opening up to the idea of a new family structure, feeling comfortable and secure with them. After they came down from the Ferris wheel, Henry insisted on trying several other rides, from roller coasters to bumper cars. Each ride was filled with laughter and joyful shouts, and Ethan watched with a happiness he hadn't felt in a long time. Olivia accompanied every moment, helping Henry choose the rides and encouraging him to enjoy every second. Watching Ethan and Henry together like this, Olivia saw it as a reflection of their emotional growth, and she also sensed how she was becoming an integral part of their lives in a unique way. At one point, after a round on the bumper cars, Henry spotted a cotton candy stand and tugged both Olivia and Ethan toward it. "Can we have cotton candy, please?" he asked with the pleading look that only a child can master. Ethan and Olivia laughed, unable to resist his enthusiasm. They bought 3 colorful cotton candies and found a nearby bench where they could enjoy the treat while taking a break. Olivia observed the interaction between Ethan and Henry, noticing that Ethan seemed relaxed with a lightness she rarely saw, while Henry was momentarily distracted by a street magician performing card tricks nearby. Ethan turned to Olivia, a soft smile on his face. "You know, it's been a long time since I've seen him this happy. I'd almost forgotten what he was like before." "Everything changed," he confessed, his expression filled with gratitude as he looked at Olivia. "And a lot of that is because of you, Olivia. I don't know if you realize how important you are to him, and to me, too." Olivia felt her heart race. His words were unexpected, but she could see the sincerity in Ethan's eyes. He wasn't just thanking her for her work with Henry, he was acknowledging her importance in their lives. For both of them, this was a deeply intense moment, charged with a quiet connection. "I'm so glad to be part of this, Ethan." Seeing Henry smile again, "It's one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had," Olivia replied, trying to maintain a professional tone, though she knew her feelings went beyond that. Ethan nodded, and for a brief moment, they exchanged a look that said more than words could convey. There was an unmistakable attraction between them, something Ethan felt growing every day, but tried to keep at a distance. He knew he shouldn't think of Olivia in that way, especially considering her role in Henry's life. Yet something in his heart told him that this connection was stronger than any logic. The moment was interrupted when Henry returned, excitedly talking about the magician and asking to see more attractions. Both Ethan and Olivia, relieved by the break in tension, agreed and spent the rest of the day filled with laughter, games, and moments that, for Henry, held the magic of a real family. By late afternoon, as the sun began to set and the park filled with twinkling lights, Henry nestled between Olivia and Ethan, clearly exhausted but happy. He looked at both of them, his eyes shining as if he were living a dream he didn't want to end. "Dad, Olivia, this was the best day ever. Can we do this again?" he asked, his voice sleepy but with a sweet smile on his face. Ethan and Olivia exchanged a smile and nodded. "Of course, Henry. We can do this anytime you want," Ethan replied, squeezing his son's hand affectionately. Olivia smiled, feeling truly integrated into that small family moment. It was impossible to deny that this connection touched her deeply, that her relationship with Ethan and Henry was evolving into something beyond professionalism. She felt part of a new reality, something that awakened feelings she hadn't experienced in a long time. On the way home, Ethan walked Olivia to her car to say goodbye. They exchanged a lingering look, and Ethan took a deep breath before speaking. "Olivia, I wanted to thank you again, not just for Henry, but for everything. You've brought a happiness to both of us that I thought we'd never see again." She nodded, feeling the intensity of the moment. Something was shifting between them, something they were both beginning to accept, even if only silently. "You've given me something special too, Ethan. Being part of your lives means so much to me," she replied, her eyes full of tenderness. For a moment, silence stretched between them, and Ethan almost stepped closer, a temptation he struggled to resist. He knew that if he let this moment continue, he might cross a delicate line he'd maintained since he first met her. He felt torn between reason and emotion, between the need to protect his bond with Henry and the growing feelings that Olivia stirred within him. "See you soon, Olivia," he said with a gentle smile, stepping back before anything more could happen. She returned his smile, understanding his inner conflict. Both of them knew that this moment marked a change, something between them that felt like an unspoken promise. As Olivia drove away, Ethan watched until her car disappeared down the street, reflecting on the feelings she stirred within him and the new life that seemed to be unfolding, full of possibilities he barely dared to imagine. And so, that night, both Ethan and Olivia lay in bed with similar thoughts. They both sensed that a new chapter was approaching, but they knew the journey would be delicate, as it involved so much more than just the two of them. On a calm afternoon, Olivia and Ethan met at a nearby cafe to discuss Henry's progress and reflect on the past few weeks. Since their outing to the amusement park, they had felt closer, yet an unspoken tension lingered, a connection that went beyond the professional realm, which both recognized, even if only in silence. Sitting by the window, they spoke briefly about Henry's development, but as their conversation deepened, Olivia noticed Ethan was more restless than usual. He kept looking away, as if searching for the right words to share, something weighing on him. "Ethan, is everything all right?" she asked gently, encouraging him to open up. He hesitated, took a deep breath, and after a few moments, nodded. "Actually," he began, his voice soft, "I just wanted to say that these past days, I've realized how much Henry has grown attached to you. And, well, I feel we're building something special too. It's made me think about a lot of things." Olivia felt her heart race. She knew they were on the brink of a conversation that could unearth feelings and memories long buried. Looking at Ethan, she saw the sincerity and effort he was putting into expressing himself. He was in a vulnerable place, balancing his life while grappling with new emotions. "I'm glad to hear that, Ethan. And if I'm being honest, I also feel very close to you both. In a way, you've given me something I didn't realize I needed," she admitted with a shy smile. He watched her, as if her words had stirred something inside him. After a brief silence, Ethan asked a question he'd always wondered, but never had the courage to voice. "Olivia, I know this might be a bit personal, but I never asked why you chose to work with children, especially with such delicate cases. Was this always what you wanted to do?" Olivia paused, considering whether to share a part of her life she rarely revealed to anyone. She knew it was a difficult question, as it involved painful memories from a past trauma, but something in Ethan's presence encouraged her to trust him. "Well, to be honest, my decision to go into child psychology came from a very personal place," she began softly, as if sharing a secret. "When I was young, I went through something traumatic. My parents separated suddenly, and my father just left. It was a tough time. My mother was so overwhelmed that she barely had time for us, and I felt so alone, not knowing who to turn to." Ethan listened intently, his eyes fixed on her. For the first time, he saw a side of Olivia he'd never imagined. His expression softened with empathy, and he started to grasp just how much she too carried emotional baggage. "I remember feeling lost, wondering if it was my fault or if something was wrong with me," Olivia continued, her voice trembling slightly. "It was then that I met a psychologist who helped me understand that my pain was valid, that I had the right to feel and express it. She changed my life. From then on, I knew I wanted to do the same for other children, to be a support for anyone who felt as lost as I did." Ethan felt a pang of sadness and admiration hearing her story. He'd never imagined Olivia had faced such challenges. To him, she had always been a source of strength and stability, someone who seemed unshakable. Knowing that she had turned her own pain into a mission to help others made him respect her even more. "Olivia, I'm so sorry you went through all that, but I deeply admire what you've done with it. Turning something so painful into a purpose, that's something very few people can do," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She smiled, grateful for his understanding, and felt that this moment was forging a bond between them she hadn't anticipated. For a brief instant, it was as if they could both see through each other's defenses. "Thank you, Ethan. I think that experience taught me the importance of having someone you can trust, someone who lets you be vulnerable without fear of judgment," Olivia said, feeling a weight lift from sharing her story. Ethan nodded, and after a pause, he chose to open up as well. "For me, vulnerability has always been strange. I was raised to be strong, to hide weaknesses and keep everything under control," he confessed, a hint of regret in his voice. "But lately, I'm realizing that this rigid approach has kept me from really connecting with Henry, from showing him that I feel the same pains. I don't know how to be vulnerable without feeling like I'm losing control." Olivia smiled, understanding the depth of his struggle. "Ethan, vulnerability is difficult, especially when we've spent our whole lives building walls. But you know what I've learned? Being vulnerable isn't about losing control. It's simply about accepting that we're human, that we have flaws, and that often, those flaws bring us closer to the people we love." Ethan reflected on her words, feeling both relief and fear. He had never allowed himself to lower his guard, but looking at Olivia, he felt he could trust her. She seemed to understand his inner struggles in a way no one else did. "That's my biggest challenge, showing Henry my humanity. I'm afraid he'll see my insecurities and feel more uncertain. I don't want him to think I'm lost, even though sometimes I feel exactly that way," he admitted sincerely. Olivia placed her hand on his in a gesture of support, looking at him with gentle understanding. "Ethan, sometimes being human is the best thing you can do for him. Henry doesn't need a perfect father. He needs a father who loves him and is by his side, even in the difficult moments. Believe me, he'll admire you even more for that." Ethan was touched by her confidence in him, and her kindness made him realize just how open he was becoming with Olivia. There was something about her that made him feel safe, a friendship and an understanding that went beyond their roles in each other's lives. "Olivia, I don't know what we would do without you. Not just for Henry, but for everything you helped me see," he said softly, his eyes meeting hers with gratitude. She smiled, sensing a deep connection growing between them. Both knew this moment was significant, that the friendship and trust they were building went beyond therapy sessions or professional advice. The silence between them was filled with meaning. For a moment, they seemed to be connected in a way that needed no words. Ethan realized there was something special between them, a bond that moved him in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. Olivia, too, felt her heart race, aware that their closeness was deepening into something more profound. "I think we're helping each other," she said finally, breaking the silence with a gentle smile. "And that is more than I could have ever asked for." Ethan nodded, a slight smile of gratitude crossing his face. He felt vulnerable yet strengthened by having someone to share his fears and insecurities with. For the first time, he allowed himself to fully trust someone, knowing that Olivia understood him on a level no one else could. As they said goodbye that afternoon, Ethan carried with him a sense of lightness and hope. He knew that the journey with Henry would still be long, but with Olivia by his side, he felt he could face every challenge with newfound strength. She had become his friend, his confidant, and perhaps something more he couldn't quite name yet. For Olivia, that afternoon marked a turning point. Her relationship with Ethan and Henry was now rooted in genuine friendship and an emotional connection she never expected to find. And as she walked home, she sensed that this story was only beginning, that something was growing between them, something that, even without words, bound them together in a unique and special way. One late afternoon, as Ethan and Henry were enjoying a rare quiet moment at home, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Surprised, Ethan went to the door and found his mother, Margaret Carter, standing there, impeccably dressed, with her usual composed and commanding posture. She wore the evaluative look Ethan knew all too well, a look that transported him back to a childhood marked by strict rules and expectations. Margaret was known for her demanding temperament, and she had always maintained a certain distance from Henry, rarely engaging actively in her grandson's life. "Mother, I didn't know you were coming today," Ethan said, trying to mask his surprise. Margaret gave him a restrained smile. "Well, Ethan, I thought it was time I checked on things here. Henry is growing up fast, and I feel it's my duty to be more present," she replied, her tone soft but laced with implicit authority. Ethan nodded, still processing her unexpected arrival. She entered the living room, surveying her surroundings with a critical eye. When she spotted Henry playing quietly with his beloved lion plush, she shook her head slightly, a trace of disapproval evident. "Henry, dear, how are you?" Margaret asked, moving towards her grandson. Henry responded with a timid nod, visibly uncomfortable. Although he knew his grandmother, he rarely felt at ease around her. She had always shown a cool and detached demeanor. Margaret turned back to Ethan. "Ethan, I'd like to discuss Henry's situation. I've been thinking that perhaps he needs more structure. We can't let him grow up without discipline, especially after everything he's been through," she stated, her voice laced with an air of authority that Ethan knew well. Ethan took a deep breath, sensing the familiar tension in the room. He knew his mother had come with opinions on how he was raising his son. And he also knew that Margaret held a very narrow view on parenting, a perspective he was actively working to move beyond in order to connect more deeply with Henry. "Mother, I understand your concern, but Henry is doing well. He's been through a lot, and we're helping him heal in a healthy way," Ethan replied, trying to keep his tone steady. Margaret, however, dismissed his words, pressing on. "That's exactly what I want to address, Ethan. This treatment he's receiving, this Olivia person, whoever she is, can she really be trusted with my grandson? From what I've heard, she engages him in sentimental activities that lack real purpose. A child needs discipline, structure, not fragility." Her words felt like a blow to Ethan. He knew his mother struggled to accept methods that diverged from the strictness with which she'd raised him. But to hear her openly criticize Olivia and Henry's healing process stung deeply. "Mother, Olivia has been an essential part of Henry's progress. Thanks to her, he's beginning to talk again, to express himself. She makes him feel safe," Ethan responded, keeping his patience intact. Margaret shook her head, her disapproval obvious. "Safety in the real world, Ethan. Safety is an illusion. Children need to be strong to handle hardship from a young age. And as for this Olivia, well, I'm certain she doesn't understand what it means to raise a child. Certainly not properly." Frustration surged within Ethan. Olivia was doing incredible work with Henry, and he knew her presence was vital to his son's recovery. But his mother seemed adamant on dismissing any approach that didn't adhere to the rigidity she had instilled in him. "Mother, I agree that discipline is important, but right now, Henry needs something different. He needs emotional support to rebuild his sense of security. Olivia understands that, and I trust her work," he said firmly, striving to keep his calm. Margaret's gaze turned icy and sharp. "You trust her? Ethan, you're being far too vulnerable. Since when do you rely on an outsider for something so delicate? Your father and I never depended on anyone to raise you. We knew exactly what was necessary, and we didn't let sentimentality interfere," she said, her tone hard. Her comments stirred memories of his own childhood, the countless times he had been deprived of affection in the name of discipline. He felt torn between the respect he still held for his mother and his conviction that Henry needed a different upbringing. "Mother, please understand. Henry is different, and I'm different too. I don't want him to grow up without the emotional support I lacked. And Olivia," he hesitated, feeling the depth of his connection to her. "Olivia has become essential, both for him and for me. She understands what Henry needs, and I won't take that away from him just because it doesn't fit your idea of discipline." Margaret's expression hardened, and she stared at him as if processing his words. "Ethan, you're being foolish. You're allowing yourself to be swayed by someone who, it seems, is affecting you in ways that are hardly professional," she said, her judgmental tone grating on him. "Trust me, this sentimental approach you think is helping Henry will not prepare him for reality." Her accusation sparked a surge of resolve in Ethan, prompting him to defend Olivia with every fiber of his being. "Mother, I don't believe in the reality you idealize. Henry doesn't need to be strong in the way you understand it. He needs to be a child. He needs to feel safe, loved, and supported. he responded, his voice carrying years of pent-up emotion. And yes, I trust Olivia, not only as a professional, but as a person. She's brought something to our lives that no one else has. Margaret's brow furrowed, surprised by his firm response. She had rarely seen Ethan stand so resolutely for anything, let alone parenting. It clearly disturbed her, and the displeasure was evident in her expression. Well, Ethan, I see you've made your choice, but let me warn you, sentimentality is no substitute for discipline, and if you allow your son to be influenced by this woman, I fear there will be consequences. I hope you know what you're doing, she said coldly, before walking out. After she left, Ethan felt a wave of exhaustion and frustration. The confrontation had drained him, and he knew his mother would not change her mind. But he also knew he was doing what was best for Henry, even if it meant defying his mother. Later that evening, Ethan called Olivia to discuss the encounter. He needed to confide in her, to share the weight of the situation. When she arrived, she noticed immediately that something was wrong. Ethan, is everything all right? She asked, concerned. He sighed, clearly trying to gather his thoughts. Olivia, my mother was here today, and well, it was a disaster, he began, exasperation in his tone. She's so rigid, and she thinks everything we're doing for Henry is pointless, too emotional. She believes what he needs is discipline, rules, not the kind of support you've been providing. Olivia felt a pang of sadness hearing this. She knew her methods challenged the beliefs of families rooted in traditional discipline. But she also understood that Ethan needed to address these issues for Henry to continue thriving. Ethan, I understand it must be hard, especially coming from your mother. I know how much her opinion matters to you. But Henry needs someone who understands his pain. And you know that discipline without emotional support isn't what he needs right now, she replied, offering a reassuring look. He nodded, feeling relief from her understanding. I know that, Olivia. But today, I realize just how much I want you to stay with us, no matter what my mother thinks. It's not just Henry who needs you. I need you too. Your presence helps me see life in a way I never could before. Olivia looked at him with warmth, deeply moved by his vulnerability. She felt he was finally allowing himself to open up fully, unreservedly. Their bond was now something more profound than mere professionalism. I'm here, Ethan, for you and for Henry, and I'm ready to face whatever challenges come our way to help you both find the peace you deserve, she said, her tone gentle and sincere. Ethan smiled, feeling immense gratitude for having Olivia by his side. He knew that with her support, he could confront any challenge, even those posed by his mother. Her presence fortified him, giving him the courage to provide Henry with the nurturing environment he needed to keep healing. For a moment, silence settled between them, filled with mutual understanding, something both seemed to recognize without needing to say it. Ethan realized that by defending Olivia to his mother, he had admitted to himself just how essential she was in his life, a feeling he had tried to keep at bay, but he knew he couldn't ignore these emotions for much longer. Olivia, he began, hesitantly but with a steady gaze. I never imagined saying this, but you've become one of the most important people in my life and in Henry's. I don't want my mother's judgment to affect what we've built here. Please know that I trust you, as much as I trust myself. Olivia smiled, feeling the weight of his words and the depth of Ethan's feelings. She, too, realized that she had grown deeply attached to this family in ways she hadn't anticipated, and that her connection with Ethan was evolving into something new, delicate, and precious. Ethan, that means so much to me, she replied sincerely. And no matter how challenging this journey is, I'm here for both of you. I believe in Henry. I believe in you, and I'm willing to face whatever it takes to give him the chance to live fully, surrounded by love and understanding. Ethan nodded, comforted by her words. Her presence was a safe harbor in the midst of all his doubts and struggles. He realized he was building something solid with her, something that felt like a true family for him and Henry. In the days that followed, tension with Margaret lingered. She called frequently, trying to convince Ethan he was on the wrong path with Henry. She openly criticized the emotional bond he was developing with his son and expressed dissatisfaction with the influence Olivia seemed to have on both of them. To her, this bond was synonymous with weakness and, in her eyes, detrimental to Henry's upbringing. During one of these conversations, Ethan made a decision he'd been avoiding for a long time. Instead of arguing, he listened patiently and in a calm yet firm voice responded, "Mother, I understand your concerns, but Henry is my son, and I am responsible for him. I've decided to create an environment where he can express himself freely and feel safe. If that means taking a different approach from the one you used with me, then that's what I'll do. Olivia is a fundamental part of this journey, and I'm not giving up on what we're building." Margaret fell silent for a moment, clearly surprised by his firmness. She tried to respond, but Ethan's resolve was evident. She, accustomed to control, found herself unable to sway him. She ended the call with a tone of displeasure, but as Ethan hung up, he felt a newfound sense of relief. He was finally setting clear boundaries in his relationship with his mother. Later, Ethan felt it was time to share his decision with Olivia. When they met at the office, he recounted his conversation with his mother, his voice full of conviction. "Olivia, my mother might not agree, but for the first time, I'm committed to doing what I believe is best for Henry. She may not accept the way I've chosen to raise him, but I'm determined to build an environment of love and support for him," he declared, his gaze steady. Olivia felt a wave of pride and happiness. She knew how difficult it was for Ethan to take a stand against his mother, but she also understood what it meant for him and for Henry. "Ethan, that's a huge achievement. Setting those boundaries with your mother is a vital step for you and Henry to have the freedom to build your lives the way you believe is best. I'm incredibly proud of you," she replied, touching his arm in support. Ethan looked at her with gratitude, realizing how much he relied on her emotionally. Being with Olivia felt like breathing freely after years of pressure. It was an emotional freedom he had never experienced before, and although he knew there were still challenges ahead, he felt secure knowing she would be there to support him. "Olivia, I don't know where we'd be without you. Henry and we consider you part of our lives now. I hope you know how much that means to us," he said softly, his words carrying an emotional depth. Olivia felt the intensity of his words, and an indescribable emotion filled her. Their bond was real, built on trust, empathy, and perhaps a feeling they both hesitated to name. When they parted that evening, Ethan and Olivia knew they had crossed an invisible line. They were more connected than ever, like a real family, even if they hadn't yet put that name to the relationship they were building. And Ethan knew, deep in his heart, that with Olivia by his side, he and Henry were ready to face any challenge. That night, as he lay in bed, Ethan realized that he was finally living the life he wanted, surrounded by love, support, and the essential presence of Olivia. And he knew that from that moment on, nothing could separate them from the new family they were creating together. On a cool, starry evening, Ethan called Olivia with a slightly hesitant tone, asking her for a favor. He had an emergency meeting at work and needed to be away for a few hours. It was late, and he didn't want to leave Henry alone, so he asked if Olivia could stay with him. "Of course, Ethan. I'd be happy to stay with Henry," Olivia replied readily. A few minutes later, she arrived at Ethan's house, where Henry greeted her with a shy but warm smile. They spent the early hours of the evening together, watching a children's movie and eating popcorn. Olivia could feel Henry's genuine affection for her, and it touched her deeply to see his progress, how he now felt comfortable opening up and interacting in a way that once seemed impossible. Around 9 o'clock, Henry was visibly tired. Olivia took him to his room, read him a story, and watched him fall asleep peacefully, with a soft smile on his face and his plush lion by his side. For her, seeing that calm expression on Henry's face was a reward for all the difficult moments they had faced together. After making sure he was sleeping soundly, Olivia went downstairs to wait for Ethan. The house was quiet, and in that moment of calm, she realized she had become an essential part of this home. The thought stirred something within her, a blend of happiness and uncertainty that she didn't fully know how to handle. Then, the door quietly opened, and Ethan entered, looking tired but visibly relieved to see her there. He offered a warm smile, as if her presence instantly eased his stress. "Olivia, thank you for coming so quickly. I hope Henry wasn't any trouble," he said, taking off his coat and draping it over a chair. "Not at all. He was an angel. He's sleeping now, as peacefully as ever," she replied, with a gentle smile. Ethan sighed, looking at her with gratitude. "You can't imagine how much this means to me, knowing I can count on you. It's something I never thought I'd have." Olivia smiled, but she sensed something different in his gaze. The silence that followed was heavy, and both seemed aware of the growing closeness between them, something that went beyond friendship and mutual respect. She felt her heart racing, and seeing Ethan so near, the feeling she'd been trying to suppress for weeks surfaced. "I think we all need someone we can rely on," she replied softly. Ethan studied her for a moment, his eyes fixed on hers. He stepped closer, hesitantly, and almost unconsciously took Olivia's hand. His touch was gentle but full of meaning. He seemed lost in her eyes, and though he knew this might cross a line they weren't meant to cross, he couldn't resist. Ethan kept her hand in his thumb slowly tracing her skin. "Olivia," he murmured, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I don't know how to express how important you are to us, to me." She felt the warmth of his hands and sensed something shifting within her. That touch was not just a gesture of gratitude or friendship. It carried a deeper feeling, a tenderness they both knew was there, but hesitated to admit. Ethan's gaze seemed to reach directly into her heart, and in that instant, Olivia knew she was entirely captivated by him. "Ethan," she began, trying to find the right words, but her voice was faint, almost trembling. They stayed silent, their hands still intertwined, and the world seemed to pause around them. There was a tension in the air, a mix of desire and uncertainty, as if both were suspended in a unique, unrepeatable moment. Ethan looked at her with an intensity that made her forget everything else. He seemed to move closer, as if it were impossible to resist the pull between them. But at the last moment, they both hesitated. Ethan released her hand, stepping back slightly, clearly fighting his own emotions. His rational side told him he shouldn't go further, that it wasn't the right time. He knew Henry needed stability, and he couldn't allow himself to be swept up in feelings that, while true, might complicate things further. Olivia also took a step back, her face slightly flushed. She knew that moment was a fine line they had crossed, even if only briefly, but she didn't want to pressure him. She understood Ethan's responsibilities and fears, and even though her heart urged her to draw closer, she knew he needed time. "I'm sorry, Olivia. I shouldn't have," Ethan began, his voice still filled with emotion, but with a hint of regret. She shook her head, smiling gently. "No, Ethan. You don't need to apologize, I think. We're both feeling things that are hard to explain, and maybe we're just trying to understand what all of this means," she replied sincerely. Ethan nodded, and the expression on his face mirrored the confusion she felt. He knew that Olivia's presence had transformed his life, that something was growing between them that couldn't be ignored. But at the same time, he felt he had to be cautious, that there was still too much at stake, especially for Henry. "Olivia, you're the most incredible person I've met in a long time, and maybe that's what scares me the most. I'm afraid of letting myself get carried away, of not being good enough, of putting you and Henry in a difficult position," he confessed, his voice low. She looked at him with tender understanding. Ethan was a man burdened by responsibility and the need to be strong for his son. The thought of opening himself up to a new relationship, with all the uncertainties that entailed, was daunting. "Ethan, I understand. And to be honest, I feel the same way. But we don't need to define anything right now. Let's just take it one step at a time, without pressure," she replied, her gaze understanding. He nodded, relieved that she understood his dilemma. The desire to be closer to her was strong, but their friendship and trust were equally precious, something he didn't want to risk without certainty. "Thank you, Olivia. Thank you for understanding, and for always being here," he said, looking at her with a blend of admiration and affection. She smiled, and the silence between them returned, but this time it was comfortable, filled with unspoken meaning. They both knew that something was building, that their connection went beyond friendship and work, but they decided to let their feelings unfold naturally. That night, as they said goodbye, Ethan and Olivia knew they had shared something special. Even though they had both stepped back, the feeling that pulsed between them was real, and each, in their own way, was willing to discover where it might lead. Henry's school was buzzing with excitement in preparation for the annual showcase event. a special time when each child participated in an artistic performance or recited a poem for parents and family. For Henry, the event brought a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Since losing his mother, he had always avoided situations that put him in the spotlight. The idea of standing in front of an audience, under the watchful eyes of his peers and parents, felt like a daunting challenge. But this time, he wouldn't be alone. Upon hearing about the event, Ethan and Olivia immediately spoke with Henry to see if he'd like to participate. It was an open invitation without pressure, but they both wanted to support him in taking this step. Henry seemed uncertain, but Olivia's encouraging gaze and Ethan's warm smile gave him an extra dose of confidence. "What if I mess up?" he asked, his voice trembling and his hands fidgeting. "What if everyone laughs at me?" Ethan crouched down to his level, placing a steady, comforting hand on his shoulder. "Henry, it's okay to make mistakes. Everyone makes them, even me and Olivia. What matters is that you try, that you give it your best. And even if you get nervous, we'll be right there cheering you on," he said gently. Olivia came closer, taking Henry's hand in hers. "Can I tell you a secret? I got nervous at many of my presentations when I was a kid, but after I did my first one, I realized it wasn't as scary as I thought," she shared, smiling at him. "And I know you're going to do great, Henry." Henry looked at them, feeling strength in their words. He knew they would be there, ready to help him face his fears. After a few moments of hesitation, he nodded, agreeing to participate. In the days that followed, Ethan and Olivia helped Henry prepare for the performance. He had chosen to recite a short poem about friendship, something simple but deeply meaningful to him. With patience and care, Olivia helped him memorize the lines, while Ethan encouraged him to project his voice and feel confident. It was an emotional journey for them both, as they watched Henry gradually overcome his insecurities and begin to believe in himself. At home, Ethan created special moments for Henry to practice, pretending to be the audience and applauding every line he recited well. Olivia also spent time teaching him breathing techniques and ways to manage his nerves, helping him feel more secure on stage. These rehearsals became a routine full of laughter, small mistakes, and plenty of triumphs. And each day, Henry felt more prepared. Finally, the day of the performance arrived. The school was decorated with colorful balloons, and a small stage had been set up at the front of the auditorium. The children, in their costumes, were excited, and the parents filled the room with smiles of pride and anticipation. Olivia and Ethan sat in the audience, side by side, visibly moved. To them, this moment represented an immense achievement, and the simple fact that Henry had agreed to step onto the stage was a victory. When Henry's name was called, he walked onto the stage slowly, scanning the audience until he found Ethan and Olivia's familiar faces. Seeing their encouraging smiles and nods of support made the world around him feel less intimidating. He took a deep breath, recalling the rehearsals, the words of encouragement he'd heard so many times, and the effort he'd put into being there. Henry began reciting the poem, his voice soft at first, but steady. He focused on each word, taking it one step at a time, just as Ethan and Olivia had taught him. As he continued, his voice grew clearer and more confident, and he began to enjoy the moment, realizing he was conquering his own fear. Olivia and Ethan exchanged a glance, their eyes shining with pride. They knew how much this simple poem represented a personal victory for Henry. Watching him face what once seemed impossible, the two shared a moment of pure emotion, as if they were a team that had worked together to help this young boy shine. As he finished the poem, Henry heard the applause and smiled shyly, still in disbelief that he had done it. For him, that moment was more than just a performance. It was a testament to his courage, something he had built with the support of the people he loved. And as he came down from the stage, he went straight into the arms of Ethan and Olivia, who were waiting for him with smiles and tears in their eyes. "You were amazing, Henry. I'm so proud of you," Ethan said, hugging him tightly. Olivia came over next, holding Henry's small hands and looking at him with a warm smile. "You were so brave, Henry. You were even better than in rehearsals," she said, unable to hide her emotion. Henry smiled, still a bit shy, but deeply happy. "I did it because I knew you'd be here. Thank you for everything," he murmured, his tone filled with gratitude that made both their hearts swell with joy. Ethan and Olivia shared a look, and in that instant, they knew they had accomplished something meaningful together. There was a connection that went beyond friendship and the supportive roles each had played. It was a bond that united them not just as friends, but as a family they were building, almost without realizing it. Ethan held Olivia's hand for a brief moment, a gesture of acknowledgement and gratitude, and she responded with a gentle smile. They both understood they were experiencing something special, something that only existed because they had supported each other in helping Henry overcome his challenges. That day, Ethan realized he could no longer deny what he felt. His admiration for Olivia had blossomed into something deeper, something he wanted to explore, though he knew it required caution. And Olivia, for her part, understood the impact she was having on Ethan and Henry's lives, feeling her affection for them grow in a way that was intense and genuine. As they left the school, Henry walked between them, holding each of their hands, his face alight with a smile. It was a simple image, but to Ethan and Olivia, it symbolized the journey of overcoming, love, and unity they had embarked upon together. They both knew that this bond, built with patience and trust, was only beginning to reveal the true potential of something much greater. In the days following Henry's performance, Ethan found himself increasingly conflicted. The moments he shared with Olivia, which had initially been purely professional and later blossomed into genuine friendship, now carried an intensity he struggled to handle. Each time she smiled, each time she showed the genuine care she had for Henry, Ethan realized he was falling in love, yet he also felt a growing weight inside. This realization made him hesitate. He knew that opening up to a relationship with Olivia would mean risking much more than just his own heart. Henry had grown attached to her in a way he hadn't with anyone since losing his mother, and Ethan feared what might happen if things didn't work out. A failed relationship could impact Henry in ways that might be irreversible, and the thought of hurting his son for the sake of his own feelings tormented him. Because of this, Ethan began to pull back. He reduced casual meetings with Olivia, and even during sessions with Henry, he maintained an emotional distance that Olivia quickly noticed. He tried to mask his feelings, hiding his anxiety behind a more formal tone and behavior that left her wondering if she had done something wrong. This unsettled Olivia, as she had sensed something special between them, something that now seemed to be slipping away. One Friday afternoon, after a session with Henry, Olivia realized she needed to understand what was going on. Ethan's detachment from someone who had once been so close and open left her feeling concerned and even hurt. Determined, she waited until Henry went off to play and asked Ethan if they could speak privately. "Ethan, can I talk to you for a moment?" she asked, her tone calm yet resolute. He looked at her, visibly tense, but nodded, realizing he couldn't avoid the conversation any longer. They walked into Ethan's office, and he closed the door behind them. Olivia faced him, sensing the weight of the distance he had been creating, and she didn't take long to express what was on her mind. "I don't know what's going on, Ethan, but I can't help noticing that you've been distant, and it's really worrying me," she said, her voice full of sincerity. "I thought we were building something important here, not just for Henry, but for us too." Ethan looked away, his inner conflict now evident. He knew it was unfair to withdraw without explanation, but he also felt uncertain of how to answer. Taking a deep breath, he finally broke the silence. "Olivia, I don't want you to think you did anything wrong. You didn't. In fact, you've done more for me and Henry than I could ever have imagined. But He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I'm scared of where this might lead. I feel like I'm falling for you, Olivia, and that terrifies me." Olivia stayed silent, absorbing his words. He was finally admitting what she had suspected, but rather than easing the tension, it seemed to complicate things. "Why does that scare you, Ethan?" she asked softly, encouraging him to continue. He took a deep breath, clearly struggling. "Because if something goes wrong, I wouldn't be the only one to get hurt. Henry has grown so attached to you, and I couldn't bear to see him suffer again. He's already been through so much. The idea that this might not work out and that he could be affected It paralyzes me." Olivia nodded, understanding his dilemma. She knew that Ethan was a devoted father and that Henry's well-being would always come first. But she also knew that by pulling away, he was hurting himself, and possibly Henry as well. "I understand your fear, Ethan, and I know you're doing this because you're thinking of Henry. But I also know that we can't live our lives based on what-ifs. Have you thought that by stepping back, you might be losing something that could be good for both of you?" she asked, keeping her gaze steady and full of kindness. "I see how happy Henry is when we're all together. He feels like he has a family, something that makes him feel safe, loved." Ethan lowered his head, his internal struggle clearly reflected on his face. He knew Olivia was right, but the fear of taking a risk was something he couldn't easily ignore. "Olivia, I don't want to rush into anything. Henry's been through so much, and I'm afraid that if I make the wrong choice, he'll end up paying the price," he said, his voice barely a whisper. She took a deep breath, her heart racing. There was love and care in Ethan's words, and she understood that his fear was genuine. But she also knew that the real mistake would be avoiding a sincere feeling out of fear that things might go wrong. "Ethan, I can't promise that everything will be perfect. No relationship is perfect, but what I can promise is that I'm here, and I want to be part of your lives. And I believe Henry deserves to see the happy, brave side of life. He's already been through enough. He doesn't need to be shielded from love, but guided by it." He raised his gaze, meeting hers. In that moment, Ethan realized just how special Olivia was, how much she understood and respected everything he felt and feared. She wasn't demanding anything from him, just showing him that love was not something to fear, but an opportunity to build something beautiful. After a few moments of silence, he finally stepped closer, taking her hands in his, this time without hesitation. He felt the warmth and reassurance her touch provided, and something inside his heart began to calm. "I'm so scared, Olivia. But you're right. Maybe I'm trying to protect Henry from something he doesn't even need to be protected from. Maybe he just needs a family, people who are willing to stay." Olivia smiled, feeling warmth fill her heart at his words. "We're all in this together, Ethan. Whatever it is, we can face it together. I don't want to replace anyone in Henry's life, but I do want to be by your side, as a friend, as a partner, or whatever we decide to be." Ethan took a deep breath, feeling a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. He stepped closer to her, his eyes still locked on hers, and in a gentle gesture, he lifted Olivia's hand to his heart, where she could feel its fast, intense beat. "Thank you, Olivia. Thank you for not giving up on me, on us." And then, in an impulse that seemed inevitable, he leaned in and kissed her. It was a gentle, tender kiss, filled with emotion, as if both were finally acknowledging everything they felt. That moment was not just about them, but about everything they had built with Henry, about the hope that together they could form something real. When they parted, they both smiled, saying nothing more. The silence between them now was an unspoken agreement, an understanding that from that moment forward, they would face whatever came together. In the weeks that followed, something new and almost magical became a part of Ethan and Olivia's routine. After the night when Ethan kissed her, they both realized that their feelings could no longer be ignored. Yet they also understood the need for caution. To protect Henry and the secure environment they had created together, they decided to keep the relationship discreet, just between the two of them. During the day, at the office or school events for Henry, they maintained a professional appearance, as always. But in the moments when they could escape responsibilities, they savored every second together. They began meeting at a discreet cafe in the neighborhood, where they could talk and laugh without concern. With Olivia, Ethan felt he could truly be himself, and the weight of his responsibilities lightened in her presence. Olivia, in turn, felt more connected to Ethan with each passing day, admiring his commitment as a father and the care he showed her. One evening, Ethan invited her over for dinner while Henry spent the night at a friend's house. It was the first time they were truly alone, and the atmosphere was different, full of anticipation and joy. Ethan prepared a simple meal with care, and together they shared stories, laughter, and moments of deep connection. At the end of the evening, they sat together on the sofa, and Ethan, without hesitation, held Olivia's hand, his gaze filled with tenderness. "I never imagined I could feel this way again," he confessed, his voice low, his eyes fixed on hers. But with you, everything feels easier, more right. Olivia, you've brought something into my life that I didn't even know I needed. Olivia smiled, moved by his sincerity. With Ethan, she too had found a part of herself that had been hidden, dormant since she began navigating the complexities of her work and her own history. Ethan, you and Henry have given me a purpose, something beyond any career. I feel like I belong here with you both, and I want to be by your side for everything that comes, she replied, her eyes shining. Unable to resist the intensity of the moment, Ethan leaned in and kissed her, a deep and genuine kiss that seemed to seal everything they had been building. It was more than passion. It was an unspoken commitment, a promise of support and partnership. As the days passed, they continued seeing each other, growing closer each time, though they were careful that Henry didn't see anything more than the familiar friendship and affection between them. Although they longed to share their love with him, they both knew that he was still in a delicate phase of recovery, and they wanted to give him time to grow comfortable with the idea of change. However, this caution began to create some tension. Ethan, who had always been guided by his sense of responsibility, now felt the burden of keeping the relationship a secret. He knew Henry needed stability, but he also longed to fully embrace his feelings for Olivia. And with each passing day, he realized she was not just someone he cared about. Olivia was the woman with whom he wanted to build a future. The thought of waiting indefinitely, of hiding what they felt, started to trouble him. Olivia felt this duality as well. She wanted to be by Ethan and Henry's side without reservations, but understood that the moment called for patience. She knew that, for Ethan, Henry's well-being was above all else. And while she accepted the need to keep things quiet, the idea of being limited by secrecy also frustrated her. Their bond was intense, a love that grew stronger every day, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to keep it contained. One evening, while they were having dinner after a long day of work, Olivia finally decided to express what she had been feeling. Ethan, I understand that we want to protect Henry, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to ensure he feels secure. But sometimes I feel like we're hiding, like we have to suppress what we feel, she said, pausing to look at him with vulnerability. Have you thought about how we could gradually let him understand what's happening between us? Ethan, who had also been contemplating this, fell silent for a few moments, considering her words. He knew Olivia was right. It was unfair to keep a secret about something that could be positive for all of them, but his fear of how Henry might react still made him apprehensive. I have thought about it, Olivia. Many times, actually. I want him to know too, so that we can live this openly. But part of me is still scared that he's not ready, that he'll see this as a threat, something that could disrupt everything he's finally beginning to rebuild, he replied, his tone filled with concern. Olivia took his hand in a supportive gesture. Ethan, Henry loves you, and he sees me as someone he can trust. I know he senses something between us, even if subtly. Kids have an incredible intuition, and I believe he'll understand, especially if he knows we're all together. For him and with him, she said, with an encouraging tone. Ethan nodded, moved by her words. He knew Olivia was right, and the idea of building a real life with her and Henry was all he wanted. But he also understood they needed to be patient, to move forward carefully so that Henry would feel included, not replaced. I think we need to start then, little by little. Maybe we can show him what this means for us, and for him too. I don't want to live in hiding anymore, Olivia. I want you to truly be part of our lives, he said, his gaze firm and resolute. She smiled, feeling her heart lighten. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, but with Ethan by her side, she felt ready to face anything together. And so, Ethan and Olivia began to chart a new path for their relationship, one where love, patience, and respect for Henry would always come first. They knew it would be a gradual process, but they were ready to do whatever was necessary to create a true family, full of love and understanding. The relationship between Olivia and Ethan, which had developed cautiously, began to take on unexpected dimensions. Though they remained discreet, The exchanged smiles and evident connection between them did not go unnoticed. Olivia's colleagues at the clinic started to observe her emotional investment in Ethan and Henry's case. What once appeared to be exemplary dedication was now seen as a potential breach of professionalism, raising concerns and sparking quiet discussions. One morning, Olivia was called into an unexpected meeting with the clinic's management. Upon entering the room, she was met by her supervisor, who regarded her with a serious expression. "Olivia, we need to talk about your involvement with a specific patient, Ethan Carter and his son." Henry, her supervisor, began directly. "We know you've been crucial in Henry's recovery, but we've also received reports that your relationship with the family is crossing professional boundaries." Olivia's heart raced. The words unsettled her. She knew she had been walking a fine line between her professional role and the feelings she had for Ethan. But hearing this from her supervisor made the situation seem even more serious. "I care deeply about Henry's progress, and I believe I've acted with integrity in my work," Olivia replied, attempting to stay calm. "But I do understand things may have become personal." Her supervisor sighed, leaning forward. "Olivia, you're an excellent psychologist, and we don't want this to affect your career. This is why I'm here to give you a formal warning. I know this is difficult, but you need to decide where to draw the line. Otherwise, this could impact not only your reputation, but also the trust of other patients in the clinic." The weight of her words hit Olivia like a blow. She knew her feelings for Ethan and her fondness for Henry were genuine, but she also knew her career had always been an essential part of her life. Leaving the meeting, Olivia felt torn, as though she was being forced to choose between the love she had found with Ethan and the profession she had worked so hard to build. Later that evening, Olivia met with Ethan to discuss what had happened. He greeted her with a smile, but his expression shifted as he sensed seriousness of her mood. "Olivia, is everything okay?" he asked, concerned, noticing the fatigue and tension on her face. She sighed, trying to organize her thoughts before responding. "Ethan, I had a meeting with my supervisor today. They've noticed that my relationship with you and Henry is crossing professional lines. I received a formal warning," she admitted, her voice slightly trembling. "And now, I'm beginning to wonder if what we're doing is really sustainable." Ethan went silent, clearly taken aback. He knew their situation was complicated, but he hadn't anticipated that it could put Olivia's career at risk. The thought that he and Henry might be an obstacle for her made him feel a surge of guilt. "Olivia, I never wanted you to go through this. I know how important your career is to you. I don't want you to lose something you've worked so hard for because of me," he said, his voice laced with concern. She looked at him, feeling his internal conflict. She knew Ethan wanted the best for her, just as she wanted the best for him and Henry. But at the same time, this relationship had become a vital part of her life, and the idea of leaving it behind was painful. "Ethan, I never imagined this would put me in this situation. I care about you and Henry more than I can express, but I feel like I'm losing control of my own path. My career has always been my purpose, and now it feels like I'm torn between two worlds," she confessed, her voice cracking. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her admission. He knew how hard it was for her to grapple with this division, and although his heart urged him to hold her close and assure her they'd find a way, his logic told him otherwise. "Olivia, maybe you need some time to think, to understand what you truly want. I don't want to be the cause of any loss or regret in your life," he said, his voice low but resolute. "Maybe Henry and I need to give you space so you can reflect." Olivia felt a pang of sadness. She knew he was only trying to protect her, but those words hurt. Yet, a part of her knew he was right. She needed clarity, a pause to understand what was truly essential to her. "Maybe that's what we need, Ethan. Some time to think about what we want, about what truly makes sense," she said, her tone sad but resolute. Ethan nodded, trying to contain the sadness he felt. He knew this distance was a hard choice, but he believed that by giving Olivia space, he was showing her the respect and support she deserved. "I just want you to know that, no matter what happens, you are a special part of our lives, Olivia, and you always will be," he said sincerely. She smiled faintly, trying to hold back tears. She knew his words were true, but she also felt the uncertainty of what lay ahead. "Thank you, Ethan. And please, tell Henry that I will always be here for him, even if I need some time to think about all of this." Ethan nodded, and without saying another word, he walked her to the door. Before leaving, Olivia looked at him one last time, and they shared a look filled with longing and sadness, both aware that this separation was necessary, yet equally painful. That night, as they said goodbye, Olivia and Ethan knew that, even though they were stepping back, their feelings would remain intact. It was a pause for reflection, a difficult choice, but one they both knew was essential for them to understand what they truly meant to each other and for the future they hoped to build. With or without obstacles, on a weekend that was meant to be peaceful, Ethan took Henry to the park to enjoy the outdoors, hoping to distract his son while also calming his own restless mind. Since he and Olivia had decided on some distance, he'd been feeling unsettled and anxious. Though he had suggested they take time apart to reflect on their priorities, he realized more each day that life felt incomplete without her. As Ethan watched Henry run toward the slide, lost in his thoughts, he suddenly heard a scream. His head shot up, and to his horror, he saw Henry trip and fall from the slide, hitting his head hard on the ground. His heart stopped. In seconds, he rushed to his son, who was crying and clutching his arm, his face pale and full of pain. Trying not to panic, Ethan scooped Henry into his arms and hurried him to the nearest hospital. Seeing his son hurt filled him with unbearable pain, and every second in the waiting room felt like an eternity. The doctor soon informed him that Henry would need a cast on his arm and that, despite the scare, he would recover smoothly. Even with that reassurance, the overwhelming fear of losing his son and Olivia's absence, which he knew would have been a comfort, weighed heavily on him. As he waited for Henry's final checkup, Ethan couldn't shake the thought that he needed Olivia. In that moment, he realized that this wasn't about choosing between his son and the love he felt for her. Olivia was the person he wanted by his and Henry's side. She made him feel whole, and in this moment of desperation, he understood he couldn't go on without her. As soon as Henry was discharged, Ethan took him home, comforted him, and helped him settle in bed to rest. When his son finally fell asleep, Ethan left the house and went directly to Olivia's clinic. He knew she'd still be there, as this was one of her longer shifts. His mind was racing. He barely noticed it was nighttime. Upon entering the clinic, he was greeted by the receptionist, who looked at him with surprise. "Hello, I'm looking for Dr. Olivia. It's a personal emergency," he said with an urgency the receptionist quickly recognized. She pointed down the hallway where Olivia was, and Ethan walked with his heart pounding. When he finally found her, Olivia was alone in one of the consultation rooms, organizing some files, not expecting a surprise visit. When she looked up and saw him, her face lit up briefly, but her expression quickly turned serious, remembering the reason they'd taken time apart. Yet, seeing the intense and worried look on Ethan's face, she knew something was wrong. "Ethan, what happened?" she asked, alarmed, moving closer to him. Ethan couldn't hold back the emotions that surged within him. Fear, guilt, and love mixed in his expression as he took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Henry, he had an accident at the park today. He fell off the slide and hurt his arm," he said, his voice trembling. "He's okay, but Olivia, I realized I can't face these things without you. While I waited at the hospital, all I could think was how much I needed you, how you're the only person who makes everything right." Olivia felt a pang of concern hearing about Henry's accident, but her heart also warmed at the sincerity in Ethan's eyes. This was the man she wanted to be with, the one finally setting aside his fears to admit what he truly felt. "Ethan, I'm so sorry for what happened to Henry. It must have been terrifying for you both," she said softly, full of emotion. "But why didn't you come to me sooner? You know I'd have been there for you both without hesitation." Ethan stepped closer, taking Olivia's hands, his gaze steady. "Because I was scared, Olivia. Scared that our relationship might hurt Henry, that it would put your career at risk, that I might lose everything again. But now I see that the only mistake is pushing you away. You're a part of our lives. Henry misses you too, and He took a deep breath, his words thick with emotion. "I love you, Olivia. and I need you more than I've ever needed anyone." Hearing those words finally spoken aloud filled Olivia with a wave of emotion. She looked back at him, her smile a blend of relief and happiness. "Ethan, I love you too, and I love Henry as if you were a part of me. I understand your fears, the responsibilities, but I believe we can face them together. No relationship is easy, but running away was never the answer," she replied, holding his hands firmly. Ethan pulled her into a hug, a gesture that mixed love with gratitude. In Olivia's arms, he felt he was finally where he belonged, where life made sense. After a moment, he pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Olivia, I promise I'll do whatever it takes to make this work. I don't want fear to stand between us anymore. Henry needs you as much as I do, and I want him to know that you're a permanent part of our lives." She nodded, moved and certain that they were finally ready to face whatever came their way. This was a new beginning, a mutual promise that together they would confront any challenges, any insecurities, knowing their love and unity would be stronger. "Then let's face it, Ethan. Let's find a way to make this real for all of us," she said, her smile bright with hope. Ethan kissed her, a kiss full of love and determination, a silent confession that he would never let fear separate them again. In that moment, they both knew that what they shared was real, something they were ready to build with patience and courage, not just for themselves, but for Henry, who deserved to witness true love in action. When they parted, Ethan looked at her with a sincere smile. "Would you like to come home? Henry's still sleeping, but I know he'd be happy to know you were there for him," he suggested softly. Olivia nodded, her heart full of love and joy. "I'd love to. After all, we're a team," she replied, taking his hand. And together, they left the clinic, ready to face a future that, despite its uncertainties, now felt more certain than ever. A few weeks after Henry's accident and his reconciliation with Olivia, Ethan felt more confident about the future he was building with her. The moments the three of them shared as a new family were full of laughter, closeness, and growing affection. Henry, increasingly comfortable with Olivia's steady presence, began showing the joy that Ethan hadn't seen in him since they lost his mother. However, one unresolved issue still weighed on Ethan: his relationship with his own mother. Since his last argument with Margaret, he had avoided confronting her about Olivia, fearing her critical, rigid outlook. He knew that, to truly move forward, he'd need to resolve the family tension and finally open his heart to his mother. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan decided it was time to talk. He called Margaret and invited her over for coffee at his house, asking that she come alone because he wanted to have a personal, honest conversation with her. Although surprised by the invitation, Margaret accepted. When she arrived, she was met by a calm but determined Ethan, whose demeanor exuded maturity and confidence. After a few minutes of chatting about trivial matters, Ethan decided it was time to address the real reason for her visit. He sat across from her, took a deep breath, and looked her directly in the eyes. "Mom, I know our last conversation about Henry and Olivia didn't end well, but there's something important about my life and the changes that have happened since then that I need you to understand," he began, his voice steady yet sincere. Margaret narrowed her eyes, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, but willing to listen. "Ethan, I've always wanted the best for you and for Henry. I hope you know that, even if I sometimes come across as rigid," she replied, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. Ethan nodded, acknowledging her perspective. "I know, Mom, and I've never doubted that you want the best for us, but what's best has changed for me. After losing my wife, Henry and I went through years of pain and uncertainty. We tried to adjust, to protect ourselves, and to move forward, but something was always missing. When Olivia came into our lives, I began to understand what was missing," he confessed, looking at his mother earnestly. Margaret watched him, puzzled but listening intently to each word. "Ethan, you know I've always been careful about who becomes part of our family. I just want to make sure you're not putting fleeting emotions above Henry's well-being," she replied, her voice still tinged with judgment. Ethan took a deep breath, sensing this was his chance to show Margaret how essential Olivia had become. "These aren't fleeting emotions, Mom. Olivia has brought not only happiness to Henry, but also a sense of safety he hasn't had since his mother passed. She's helped him face his trauma, to find his voice again. And beyond that, she's brought joy and hope to me, he said, his voice full of emotion. I've fallen in love with her, Mom. I'm committed to building a new life with her. Margaret remained silent, absorbing his words. It was clear that this was difficult for her, as her traditional view held that life was built on duty and convention, not emotion. Ethan, you've always been strong, disciplined. It's hard for me to see you letting your heart guide these decisions, she said hesitantly. Ethan smiled, this time with a serene expression that showed his conviction. It's because I was raised that way that I understand there are times we need to listen to our hearts. I'm not ignoring my responsibility to Henry. On the contrary, I'm recognizing that, to be a good father, I need to be whole. I need to show him that love isn't something to be afraid of. Olivia gave me that clarity, and if I refuse to live that, if I'm cold and rigid with him the way you were with me, I'm afraid he'll grow up afraid to open up, to trust. Margaret seemed taken aback, but Ethan noticed a shift in her gaze, as though his words were starting to resonate with her. I always wanted you to be strong, Ethan, to never need anyone, but now I see that. Maybe I closed myself off to certain feelings, she admitted, in a rare tone of vulnerability. Ethan realized this was an opening he'd never imagined seeing in his mother, and decided to be even more honest. Mom, I know you wanted to protect me from the world, and I'm grateful for everything you did for me. But Henry, he needs a family that makes him feel safe, loved, and complete. Olivia has become part of that family, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to keep it that way. I know this may be hard for you, but I'm asking you to try to accept it, he said in a calm tone. Margaret sighed, looking at the floor for a moment before raising her eyes to meet her son's, this time with an expression that was less critical and more thoughtful. If this woman has truly brought all that into your life and into Henry's, then maybe I was too hasty. You're my son, Ethan, and I only want what's best for you and my grandson. I promise I'll try to understand, she said, her voice a mixture of pride and reluctant acceptance. Ethan smiled, feeling an immense relief upon hearing that. He knew his mother still had a long way to go to fully accept Olivia, but her willingness to try was a significant step. Thank you, Mom. It means a lot to me, to all of us, he said sincerely. Margaret nodded, and for the first time, she showed a faint, almost imperceptible, but genuine smile. It was as though she was finally recognizing that love could be a positive force, something that didn't need to be repressed or feared. As they said goodbye, Ethan felt he had made peace with an important part of his past. He knew that reconciling with his mother meant additional support for the future he wanted to build with Olivia and Henry. When he returned home, he found Olivia and Henry preparing dinner together, a scene radiating warmth and familiarity. Olivia greeted him with a warm smile, and Henry ran up to him, eagerly sharing what he'd learned from her in the kitchen. Ethan looked at them, feeling that he was finally at peace with the new family he'd formed. He knew that, although there would still be challenges, he now had the love, support, and understanding of those who mattered most in his life. And that night, as they shared dinner, he felt the future shining with a renewed promise that love, family, and true happiness were finally within reach. In the weeks following the conversation with his mother, Ethan and Olivia lived in a phase of pure happiness, savoring every moment together as a true family. The reconciliation with Margaret and her gradual acceptance of Olivia had brought a new lightness to Ethan's life. For the first time in years, he felt he was exactly where he was meant to be. With Olivia and Henry by his side, he knew that the future was a wide open space, filled with possibilities. Ethan and Olivia began to share more frequent romantic outings, and their love for each other only grew. With each dinner, every walk, and every late-night conversation, Ethan became more certain that Olivia was the love of his life. This realization led him to dream of something bigger. He wanted her to be, officially, a permanent part of his family. The idea of proposing to Olivia began to grow in his heart, and little by little, he started planning a way to make the moment truly special and unforgettable. To make it even more meaningful, Ethan decided to include Henry in the proposal. He knew how much his son had grown attached to Olivia, and how much she already meant to him, and he wanted Henry to feel included in the moment. One day, while Olivia was out for a consultation, Ethan called Henry over for a special conversation. "Henry, what do you think about the idea of having Olivia as an official part of our family?" he asked, trying not to let all of his emotions show. Henry looked up at his father, his eyes shining as though he already knew the answer, even before fully understanding the question. "You mean she would really be my mom, Dad?" Henry asked with a shy but hopeful smile. Ethan nodded, smiling at his son's reaction. "Yes, Henry. I want Olivia to be a part of our lives forever. And to make that happen, I'm going to ask her to marry me. But to make this special, I'd like you to help me. What do you think?" he suggested, eagerly awaiting his son's response. Henry grinned, excited, and hugged his father tightly. "I'd love to help. Olivia is the best person in the world. I want her to be my mom forever," he replied with childlike sincerity, filling Ethan's heart with joy. With Henry's help, Ethan planned a special evening for the proposal. He decided to take Olivia to the park where they'd spent their first day together as a family, the day Henry had overcome his fears and given his school presentation. To Ethan, that place symbolized the beginning of the new journey they were embarking on together, and he knew it would be the perfect spot to make their love an official commitment. On the chosen day, Ethan and Henry prepared everything carefully. Henry, thrilled, helped his dad set up a cozy picnic under a tree, decorated with soft lights and flowers they had picked together. The setting was intimate and welcoming, exactly how Ethan wanted it. When everything was ready, Ethan went to pick up Olivia, doing his best to keep the surprise while leading her to the park, giving away nothing about what awaited her. When they arrived, Olivia saw the enchanting scene under the tree. The soft glow of the lanterns, the flowers, and the care put into every detail made the place feel magical. She smiled, surprised and touched by the effort Ethan and Henry had put into it. "What is all this, Ethan?" she asked, her eyes alight with curiosity. Ethan took her hand and led her to the setup where Henry was already waiting with a shy but eager smile. Beside him was a small box, which he held carefully. "Olivia, since you came into our lives, everything has changed for the better. Henry and I found a happiness and peace we never thought we'd feel again. You've shown us the value of love, support, hope, and I know I don't want to spend another day without you by my side," he said, his gaze locked with hers, letting all the sincerity of his feelings shine through. Olivia felt tears well up in her eyes, unable to hold back the surge of emotion. Ethan looked at Henry, who took a step forward and, smiling, handed the little box to Olivia with a gentle, heartfelt voice. "Olivia, will you be my mom forever?" Henry asked, his voice full of sweetness and sincerity. Olivia placed a hand on her heart, completely moved by the boy's gesture. With tears in her eyes, she knelt to be at Henry's level, holding his hands lovingly. "Henry, I already love you as if you were my own, and nothing would make me happier than being your mom forever," she whispered emotionally. Watching this special moment between the two, Ethan felt his own heart swell with happiness. Then, he knelt beside them, took the ring from the box, and looked deeply into Olivia's eyes. "Olivia, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and Henry's mom, and share this life we're building together?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Olivia, still overwhelmed with surprise and joy, smiled through her tears and nodded without hesitation. "Yes, Ethan, I will. I will be your wife, I will be Henry's mom, and I will spend every day by your side. You are everything I've ever wanted," she replied, her heart full of love. Ethan slid the ring onto her finger, and they embraced as Henry joined them, making the moment a true celebration of love and unity. There, beneath the soft lights in the park, Ethan, Olivia, and Henry became an official family. The fears, doubts, and hardships now seemed like mere steps on a journey that had led them to that moment, where love triumphed over everything. Together, they knew they were ready to live out the future, creating a new story full of hope and true love. After the wedding, Ethan and Olivia experienced intense happiness, especially with Henry, who had adapted to their new home with a joy that brightened their days. The new family routine brought a peace that Ethan and Olivia hadn't felt in a long time. However, as the months passed, they realized that life as a couple wouldn't be without its challenges. With a recent marriage and many lingering emotional issues from their pasts, small tensions began to emerge, ones they knew they would need to face with patience and understanding. At first, the issues were minor and routine: scheduling, work commitments, exhaustion, and the need to balance family time with professional demands. Olivia, still dealing with pressures at the clinic, worked hard to juggle her roles as mother and wife with her career. Meanwhile, Ethan became increasingly involved with his company's expansion, often leaving him exhausted and with little family time. Small disagreements began to arise, issues they both tried to resolve calmly, but which gradually added tension between them. One evening, after Henry had gone to bed, Ethan and Olivia were sitting in the living room, discussing weekend plans, when a minor comment about household chores sparked a larger disagreement. Ethan, feeling overextended and stressed from work, felt pressured, while Olivia was equally exhausted from the demands of the clinic. "Ethan, I know work has been demanding, but sometimes I feel like I'm the only one keeping the house in order," Olivia said, her tone slightly more serious than she'd intended. Ethan took a deep breath, trying not to react impulsively. "Olivia, I'm doing my best too. It's not easy to keep up with everything. I also need time to adjust to all of this," he replied, his voice a bit terse. Olivia noticed that their exhaustion was making both of them more defensive, yet she couldn't ignore the frustration building within her. "I understand we're both adjusting, Ethan, but sometimes it feels like we're growing apart. We're under the same roof, but I feel like we're disconnecting," she said, trying to express her feelings honestly. Her words hit Ethan, and he fell silent, reflecting. He knew she was right, and that, in some way, they'd been prioritizing responsibilities over their relationship. However, the pressures of work and family life made him feel like he was always falling short, never able to do enough. "I feel that too, Olivia, but it's not from a lack of love. It's from a lack of time. We're dealing with so much at once, and sometimes I feel like, no matter how hard I try, it's never enough," he admitted, his tone more vulnerable. Olivia heard the sincerity in his words and took a deep breath, calming her heart. She knew they would need to make adjustments and be patient with each other. "Maybe we're being too hard on ourselves, Ethan. It's natural for marriage to bring challenges, especially with so many responsibilities. But I want you to know that I'm here to face this with you. I just don't want us to lose each other along the way," she said gently, her gaze soft and understanding. Ethan nodded, comforted by her empathy. He moved closer, holding Olivia's hands, looking at her with gratitude and affection. "Olivia, I want this to work more than anything, and maybe I need to learn to share responsibilities more, to understand that I don't have to carry it all alone. But I need you to be patient with me, and I promise I'll do the same for you," he said, a silent promise in his words. From that moment, they decided to make small adjustments to help them handle the demands of marriage and work. They began to share household tasks more equally, plan specific family moments, and communicate more openly, ensuring they didn't let frustrations build up. A few weeks later, they instituted a weekly date night and night just for the two of them to go out, have dinner, and talk about whatever was on their minds, free from the pressures of daily life. On their first night out, they went to a quiet restaurant where they could look each other in the eyes, away from responsibilities, as they had in the early days of dating. "I feel like we're finding our way again," Olivia said, smiling as she held Ethan's hand across the table. "I do too, and I'm realizing that having you by my side makes everything lighter, Olivia. I know there will be other challenges, but now I believe we can face them," he replied, his face lit with renewed confidence. That night, they laughed, talked, and shared dreams and plans, reminding each other why they had chosen this life together. With each word and each look, Ethan and Olivia found renewed strength in the love they shared. The following months brought more stability and understanding, and Ethan, Olivia, and Henry settled into a routine that worked for everyone. Of course, challenges still arose, but the way they learned to handle them with patience and open dialogue became the foundation of a strong and resilient relationship. And at the end of each day, when they finally gathered together, Ethan and Olivia knew that, no matter the difficulties, they had built something solid. The love that bound them was stronger than any obstacle, and with each new step, they grew closer, confident that together, they were on the right path. As the months went by, Ethan and Olivia's home transformed into a true sanctuary for Henry. He now walked through the rooms with a lightness he hadn't felt before, ran freely through the garden, and his laughter echoed around the house, filling it with joy. Henry blossomed in ways that even surprised Ethan and Olivia, who, despite closely following his progress, were deeply moved to see him becoming such a confident, lively child. Henry's transformation didn't go unnoticed by those around him. At school, he became more comfortable making friends and getting involved in activities, eagerly participating in projects and performances. Teachers and classmates praised his kindness and courage, and Henry, once shy and insecure, now eagerly raised his hand in class discussions, shared ideas, and was often seen leading small groups of friends in play. One afternoon, during a meeting with Henry's teacher, Ethan and Olivia heard words they would never forget. The teacher, smiling and visibly impressed with Henry's progress, commented, "Henry is a new boy. He's much more confident, happy, and involved. He seems to have found a balance and confidence that makes him a remarkable child. It's truly admirable how much he's grown and transformed over the past year." Ethan and Olivia exchanged glances, their eyes glistening with tears held back. They knew that this transformation hadn't been easy for Henry. The trauma of losing his mother and the years of silence that followed had created emotional barriers he'd only managed to break down because of the love and understanding that had come into his life. This was a victory not only for Henry, but for the entire family. On the way home, Ethan held Olivia's hand as he drove, both still moved by their conversation with the teacher. "Seeing Henry like this, so happy, makes me realize that every challenge we faced was worth it. He's an extraordinary child, Olivia, and a big part of that is thanks to you," Ethan said softly, looking at her with admiration. Olivia smiled, her heart warmed. Seeing Henry flourish was to her the greatest reward of all. "Ethan, the love and dedication you've always had for him made all the difference too. Henry needed a stable foundation to grow, and you were that foundation. I just helped strengthen what was already there," she replied, squeezing his hand warmly. At home, Henry continued to show signs of his newfound confidence. He frequently called Ethan and Olivia to look at his drawings, to play a game, or simply to tell them about what he'd learned at school. One evening, while they were making dinner together, Henry, who was helping to chop vegetables, turned to his parents with a look of determination. "Dad, Olivia, do you know what I love most about our home?" he asked, his voice full of curiosity and wonder. Ethan and Olivia paused, giving him their full attention. "What do you love most, son?" Ethan asked, smiling. Henry looked at them, his eyes shining. "I love that here. We can talk about anything, laugh, and that we don't have to be afraid of anything. I feel safe," he answered, with the innocent yet profound wisdom of a child. Those words melted Ethan and Olivia's hearts. The safety he felt, the freedom to be himself, was exactly what they had always dreamed of providing for Henry. Seeing the confidence growing inside him made them feel that every sacrifice, every hardship, had been worthwhile. That night, after putting Henry to bed, Ethan and Olivia sat beside him, watching their son sleep peacefully. His room, once a neutral, impersonal space, was now filled with colors, toys, and his own drawings. It was a reflection of the journey they had walked together. It's amazing to see how much he's grown and transformed. The Henry we see now is living proof that love and support can heal even the deepest wounds," Olivia whispered, resting her head on Ethan's shoulder. Ethan put his arm around her, feeling whole and at peace. "You're right, and all of this was only possible because you were by our side. I don't know what would have become of us without you, Olivia. Thank you for changing our lives," he said, kissing her gently on the forehead. They stayed there in silence, watching Henry's peaceful sleep, reflecting on everything they had gone through to reach this moment. They knew that new challenges would come, as in any family, but they also knew that they had built a solid foundation where love, trust, and respect would always prevail. And with that, Ethan, Olivia, and Henry finally allowed themselves to dream of a future filled with hope, knowing that together, they could face anything life had in store for them. Several years had passed since the day Olivia first stepped into Ethan and Henry's lives, transforming their worlds in ways none of them could have anticipated. Over time, The pains of the past gave way to a new reality filled with love, small victories, and moments that redefined what family truly meant. That sunny afternoon, Ethan and Olivia had organized a small celebration to honor Henry's piano recital performance, a project he had dedicated himself to passionately, marking yet another step in his growth. The living room was decorated with balloons, lights, and cherished family photos that seemed to tell the story of their journey together in images. Henry, now a confident, lively boy, chatted animatedly with his grandparents and friends who had come to celebrate, radiating joy. Ethan and Olivia exchanged a look, taking in each detail and every smile around them. Life hadn't always been easy, but the hardships had only made them stronger, and now they were exactly where they wanted to be. For Ethan, who had spent years in the shadows of pain and fear, this scene was a dream come true. He had a complete family, a wife who was his life partner, and a son who had blossomed beyond his expectations. Olivia, in turn, knew she had found something she had always sought, a home, an unbreakable love, and a purpose that filled her with gratitude every day. In the midst of the celebration, Henry approached his parents with a proud smile. "Dad, Olivia, thank you for throwing this party for me. This was the best day of my life," he said, hugging them both. Ethan and Olivia laughed, embracing him tenderly. Ethan then knelt to be at his son's eye level and looked into his eyes. "Henry, the truth is that we're the ones who are grateful for you, son. You've taught us so much about courage and love, and for all that, we're prouder of you than you could ever imagine," he said, his eyes shining. Olivia nodded, gently caressing Henry's face with a smile. "You're our greatest gift, Henry. Never forget that we're here for everything, to support you, to watch you grow and achieve anything you set your mind to." Henry smiled, and in his eyes was the certainty that he was loved, that he belonged to a home that welcomed him with open hearts. To him, Olivia had long been more than a new mom. She was his friend, his partner, someone he could rely on no matter what. Later, as the party came to an end and Henry went to bed, Ethan and Olivia sat on the porch, gazing at the stars and savoring the peace that filled the air. In silence, they held hands, both reflecting on the journey that had brought them together. "I never imagined life could give me something this beautiful, Olivia. I spent so long trying to be strong on my own, but you showed me that real strength lies in sharing life with someone," Ethan said, breaking the silence. Olivia smiled, looking at him, equally moved. "I never imagined I'd find a home like this either. Ethan, you and Henry filled a space in my heart that I didn't even know was empty. Now I feel like I'm part of something bigger, something that can't be broken." They embraced, a gesture that expressed everything they felt: a deep love, an unshakable commitment, and gratitude for the gift they were to each other. In that moment, Ethan knew that even if the future brought more challenges, they were ready. They had built something that transcended any obstacle, something that made each day purposeful and joyful. And alongside Olivia and Henry, he felt he finally had everything he had ever wished for. Together, Ethan, Olivia, and Henry had become a new family, a home where love and understanding formed the foundation of each day. They had overcome losses, fears, and uncertainties, and in the end, they discovered that, despite everything, they were a true team, a family united by unbreakable bonds of love. And beneath the starlit sky that night, they knew that as long as they were together, they had found the happiness. They had always searched for a happiness that was simple, genuine, and complete.